On the Gaia continent, monsters have been mysteriously vanishing for several years now. At first, people thought these creatures were just going extinct, but surprise, surprise, they were actually being whisked away to another dimension. This twist is precisely what one particular mage had been hoping to uncover all along. This mage has spent ages studying the sudden monster exodus, though he's still clueless as to the why and how of their interdimensional trips. Instead, his real focus is on how he can harness this power for himself. After gathering every scrap of research he could find, he finally set up a magic circle deep within a dungeon called the Great Labyrinth. Now, with all his work coming to fruition, he sets the coordinates, channels his mana, and steps onto the magic circle, ready for the grand leap to another world. A brilliant light flares up around him as the spell takes effect, illuminating everything in a radiant aura. Then, in a blink, everything goes still. Confused, the mage realizes that while the air feels different and the temperature is off, he's not in another dimension after all. Nope, he's still outside the dungeon, or rather, the entire dungeon has been transported to another dimension, leaving him stuck in a hole where the dungeon used to be. Meanwhile, in a different dimension, a young man stands in his attic, gaping at the interdimensional portal that suddenly popped up before him. Up until a few seconds ago, his day was pretty ordinary. Kong Janik had been going about his work, observing the bustling college students around him, feeling a twinge of nostalgia for the days when he, too, had passion and purpose. Nowadays, though, as a D-rank hunter, he doesn't exactly have the luxury of career dreams. His coworker snaps him back to reality, reminding him that they're only halfway through their workload and there's no time for standing around. After a grueling day, the two men finally rest in their van. Oddly, Gene Hook is barely bundled up despite the chilly weather. Turns out, one perk of being a hunter, no matter how low-ranking, is an enhanced tolerance to temperature, saving him a nice chunk of change on his heating bill. Sure, hunters enjoy some nifty perks, but Gene Q's still slogging it out in part-time labor jobs. Why? Because he's flat broke, and with all the guilds monopolizing hunter gigs, there's not much he can do about it. A local serial killer has been wreaking havoc, targeting hunters from top guilds, and now those guilds are greedily snapping up every hunter job in sight. So much for climbing the ranks anytime soon. Today, however, seems to be Gene Yu's lucky day. A loud crash, followed by screaming, echoes from the school area. This is his chance. Chaos like that can only mean monsters are on the loose, and just bagging a few could set him up with enough cash to coast for a whole year. But as luck would have it, his dreams are promptly crushed when a man barrels in, shoving Jinnik aside as several other hunters swoop onto the scene. Titan, the guild managing the area, is already there, and in a flash, they take control of the situation. Duyin, the deputy guild master, snaps at Jinnik, telling him to get lost unless he's itching for a one-way ticket to the afterlife. The gap between him, a mere D rank, and an A-rank hunter from a big-time guild is just too massive to bridge. With his aspirations trampled, he trudges on to his next part-time gig, hoping at least that will pay a few bills. Later, as he arrives home, weighed down by a hefty dose of defeat, he hears a strange noise coming from deeper in his apartment. Investigating, he finds himself face-to-face with a portal to another world, packed with monsters. The creatures can't seem to see him, and he's able to pass through with zero weird reactions on his end. This could be the break he's been looking for. Heading downstairs to gather his thoughts, he ponders his options. This portal is definitely some sort of dungeon, a concept that up until now had only existed in theory. Had it appeared anywhere but his attic, he'd be thrilled. But it's here, in his own home, which complicates things. Reporting it to the association would mean they'd kick him out for investigative purposes. So his only real choice is to keep it under wraps and claim it as his own. First, he needs to confirm if monsters can cross over to his side of the portal. Thankfully, they can't see him, a definite plus, given that he could handle, at best, 2 or 3 goblins solo. If a whole group decided to jump through, he'd be toast. With nothing left to lose, he takes a deep breath and steps through the portal, landing on the first floor of a dungeon maze. He barely has time to take in his surroundings before a goblin rushes him from the left, club in hand. Narrowly dodging, he scrambles back into his attic, watching as the goblin looks around, confused, swinging at the empty air. It seems they really can't see the portal from their side, which also means they can't come through it either. With that knowledge, his fear evaporates. He grabs a baseball bat, hops back through the portal, and charges the goblin head-on. Swinging with all his might, he catches the goblin on the cheek, sending it flying, and follows up with a decisive stab to its chest. With his first monster hunt under his belt, he raises the bat and brings it down on the goblin's head, ending the fight instantly. For the first time, he's hunted solo, and with no one to share the spoils, all the experience points are his. His level, stagnant for the past 3 years, immediately ticks up, and the goblin's body is his to sell. A potential 3 million won if he plays his cards right. The next day, he heads to a hunter's market, trying to sell off the goblin corpse. One look at the body, and the merchant can tell our guy's a newbie. His inexperience has severely lowered the goblin's market value. Still, Jinnik manages to secure a little over 3 million won, just as he'd hoped. All he needs to do now is provide the area where he hunted the goblin for verification. That's one piece of information Jinnik can't afford to reveal. If anyone finds out there's a dungeon in his attic, his profits could vanish faster than a goblin hit by a baseball bat. While Jinnik is trying to figure out a way to escape his latest predicament, a group of hunters from the Black Dragon Guild storms in like a pack of hyenas on the scent of fresh prey. Apparently, someone dared to steal a kill from their territory, and they're not pleased. At first, they zero in on Jinnik, ready to confront him, but the merchant quickly redirects their wrath to a blonde-haired hunter who, oblivious to the whole situation, becomes the unfortunate target. The hunters close in on him, and after a quick introduction, he's left barely able to stand. Sneaking into their territory to hunt monsters without permission? Big mistake. For all they know, he could even be the serial killer they're hunting. With the poor guy barely able to string a sentence together, they drag him out of the building to continue their interrogation elsewhere. Watching the scene unfold, Jinnik realizes that he could have easily been in the blonde's shoes. Knowing that there's no way he can lie his way out of where he got the goblin from, he decides that selling it here isn't worth the risk. If he values his life, he'll have to find another way to offload his loot without dealing with goons from the big guilds. As soon as Jinnik gets back home, he decides it's time to level up. Before he heads back into the dungeon, he arms himself with a teleportation stone for quick escapes back to his apartment, a monster tracking compass with a 50-meter range, and of course, his trusty baseball bat. Fully equipped, he steps back into the dungeon for a monster-slaying spree, each victory ticking up his level by 1. True to its name, the Goblin Labyrinth is packed with goblins, making it the perfect playground for someone at his level to grind for experience. After a long day of hunting, his inventory is nearly maxed out. He's got room for just one more goblin. He hopes it'll be a big one for some extra cash. The compass pings, showing a goblin approaching his location. Perfect. All he needs to do is hide and launch a surprise attack. Jinnik positions himself around a corner, waits for the perfect moment, and swings his bat right into the face of a remarkably short man. To Jinnik's horror, it's not a goblin, but a very irate stranger, shouting at him in a language he can't understand. Jinnik hurriedly bows an apology, which seems to calm the man down just enough. The stranger pulls 2 necklaces from a bag, hands one to Jinnik, and as soon as Jinnik puts it on, he can suddenly understand every furious word the man is saying. That's when he realizes 2 things. First, the guy has every reason to be mad, having just taken a bat to the face. And second, this isn't just a short man. It's a dwarf, a mythical being he'd only read about in fantasy novels. As the dwarf continues to rant, Jinnik helps pick up the items scattered around, all of which look exceptionally high quality. Unfortunately, he doesn't get a chance to admire them before the dwarf notices his bat and snatches it up, demanding to know where Jinnik got it. Baffled, Jinnik explains it's just an ordinary aluminum baseball bat, but the dwarf seems to think it's made from orichalcum, a highly prized metal. To the dwarf, this ordinary bat is so valuable that no amount of money could buy it. Instead, he offers Jinnik a trade, some rare items from his own stash in exchange for the bat. Seeing no reason to refuse, Jinnik follows the dwarf back to his workshop, watching as the dwarf takes the bat deeper into the maze of tools and treasures. As Jinnik glances around the workshop, his eyes fall on the various weapons laid out. He can't help but wonder which one he should try to swipe, but the dwarf returns before he can make up his mind. In his hands, Jinnik's newly upgraded baseball bat. For some reason, it's shining bright red and has a slight glow. Jinnik double-checks. Is this really his bat? The dwarf confirms that it's just one of Orichalcum's traits. It starts out weak and flimsy, but once enchanted, it becomes incredibly strong and durable. That last word catches Jinnik's attention. Enchanted. Somehow, the dwarf managed to enchant his bat. Testing a few swings, Jinnik notices it feels entirely different from what he remembers. It's almost hard to believe that something this powerful could even exist, let alone be made from an ordinary aluminum bat. He checks his status menu, and sure enough, his bat is now classified as a legendary item, boasting S-grade durability and an automatic retrieval feature. Jinnik's once basic bat has turned into an ultra-rare treasure. Selling this would be a jackpot, but the item's bound to him now, so no dice. Still, even if he can't make money off the bat, he can always make some cash with the goblin corpses he's stashed in his inventory. The problem? He can't sell them openly without drawing unwanted attention. His best option is the Hunter Industries black market. They don't ask questions and have a solid setup for dealing with unique inventory. Jinnik heads home, uses one of the black market business cards, and tracks down a suspicious-looking address. The card screams shady, but it's all he's got. While searching for the entrance, a man named Deputy Cho Hyung-il calls down to him and invites Jinnik to meet the boss. The boss, Lee Jun-chul, is a loan shark disguised as a loan agent who also dabbles in monster corpses on the side. When Jinnik lays out 20 goblin corpses for inspection, the two men are stunned. Despite being a newbie, Jinnik managed to bring in such a huge haul, and in incredible condition too, well, except for the bashed-in heads. As they're negotiating prices, they're interrupted by a black market merchant rushing in to announce that a monster has shown up nearby. Turns out, laying out 20 fresh goblin corpses was like putting up a neon sign for nearby monsters. Worse yet, two orcs, definitely out of Jinnik's league, appear, and Jinnik quickly realizes he has two options: grab his corpses and run, or become orc food. But it's too late. One of the orcs is already swinging a battle axe straight at his head. He dodges the first swing, but the second one's too close. Just when he thinks it's game over, his enchanted bat magically summons itself from his inventory and blocks the attack, sending the orc flying back. Another enchantment, presence detection. With this bat, Jinnik might actually stand a chance. As the orc charges again, Jinnik, now more confident, goes on the offensive. He smashes the bat down on the orc's knee, disorienting it, and follows up with a strike to its face, snapping its neck instantly. Just like that, his level jumps from 24 to 36, before he can celebrate the second orc attacks. This time, he dodges, runs behind it, and slams his bat into its back, then finishes it off with a blow to the head. With the orcs defeated, Jinnik smirks, turns back to the men, and suggests they add the orc corpses to their deal. That day, he walks away with a spring in his step, having convinced them to pay him 15% above market price. His bank account is now a sight to behold, and, thanks to saving the black market crew, he secured a reliable buyer for his future loot. Clearly, the black market guys have realized Jinnik isn't some low-level thief. They're looking at a hunter strong enough to take down two orcs solo. Even with his legendary bat and newfound strength, though, he knows he'll need better gear to tackle higher-grade monsters. Fortunately, he's got a plan to score his next upgrades, maybe even for free. The next day, Jinnik shows up with a crate full of beer cans and alcohol for the dwarf, thinking he'd struck gold. After all, the dwarf loves aluminum, so why not beer cans? The dwarf's eyes widen, seeing the crate full of orichalcum. He tries a can, only to spit it out immediately, the taste absolutely horrible. To avoid another shouting match, Jinnik quickly offers him some soju instead. The dwarf takes a swig, and while he's mildly satisfied, there's clearly room for improvement. Jinnik can sense it. The dwarf is looking for that extra kick. Taking advantage of the moment, the dwarf gives Jinnik a new quest: mine some mithril ore. What does mithril have to do with alcohol? Who knows, but Jinnik wants free gear, so he's in. He dives deeper into the labyrinth, emerging at a large forest clearing on the second floor. A menu pops up, telling him he can record this location as a warp point. Jinnik has no idea what a warp point is, but accepts anyway, creating a portal to travel between floors. He ventures further, reaching the second floor, ominously called Dogs and Skeletons. Immediately, monster dogs leap at him. Compared to the orcs he fought before, these are nothing more than free XP. He swings his bat with abandon, wiping out 25 of them and collecting their corpses. That haul alone should net him a solid 200 million won. Tempting as the money is, he has to stay focused on his mission, mining that mithril ore. As he journeys deeper, skeletons start appearing. Since skeletons can't be sold and must be destroyed by breaking their core, Jinnik realizes why the dwarf sent him instead of going himself. Skeletons are an absolute pain to deal with, but they do help boost his level to 100, unlocking a new class. Expecting a berserker or warrior class after all the fighting he's done, he's shocked to find out he's been designated a cleric. After dispatching the skeletons, he finally collects the mithril ore. The dwarf, who doubted he'd make it back alive, seems impressed. As a reward, he offers to forge anything Jinnik wants. Already armed with a legendary bat, Jinnik requests lightweight armor that can still withstand heavy hits. The dwarf gets to work, and Jinnik heads home for a well-deserved nap. A few hours later, he returns to find the dwarf ready with a new piece, mithril chainmail. It's designed to fit snugly under his shirt and hoodie, making it the perfect hidden armor. To demonstrate, the dwarf smacks Jinnik in the chest with a hammer, an attack that would have normally broken a rib or two, but Jinnik barely feels it. With this armor and his enchanted bat, his combat skills have skyrocketed. Meeting this dwarf was definitely the lucky break he'd been waiting for. But the dwarf isn't done. He hands Jinnik a large barrel of soju, made from the mithril or Jinnik brought back. Jinnik takes it home to try and discovers the dwarf was right. The mithril barrel has transformed the soju into something completely unique. With this in hand, he contacts the black market dealer again, offering not only cobalt corpses, but now also premium quality liquor. Meanwhile, in another part of town, the Titan Guild is finishing a training session when an unexpected anomaly gate opens, spewing hordes of lizardmen. The deputy guild master, Andon, stubbornly refuses to call for backup, pushing his team to hold the line on their own. Jinnik, however, is having a much better day. His cleric class is now officially registered, and he's been promoted from D rank to C rank. Given that clerics are rare and highly sought after by top guilds, he's excited about the new opportunities. Just then, a bloodied hunter bursts in, desperate for a cleric's help. Jinnik volunteers and is taken to the site where Titan Guild members are locked in battle with the lizardmen. He's instructed to stay in the back and heal as many people as he can. Jinnik wants to jump in on the action, but the guild member assures him that healing is all he needs to do, and he'll be handsomely paid once the fight is over. The healer's presence is enough to keep the guild members fighting, but the waves of lizardmen are relentless. One of the other clerics suggests calling a support guild for backup, as the odds are starting to look grim. Just as Jinnik is considering their next move, he senses a hostile presence behind him. His trusty bat saves him from a near-fatal blow delivered by a sneaky lizard man who somehow bypassed all the hunters, aiming straight for the healers. Realizing that the rear defense has been breached, Jinnik swings his bat, sending the attacker flying. He quickly warns the other clerics about the breach, understanding that he's the only one who can hold them off. The monsters must have used a concealment technique to slip through, planning to ambush the healers from behind. Jinnik instructs the clerics to focus on healing and leave the lizard men to him. The other clerics look at him with concern. They think he's just another ordinary healer like them. But Jinnik charges in, reassuring them with a confidence he's only kind of feeling himself. In reality, he's nervous, but he manages to hold his ground against the onslaught. At one point, a lizard man slips past his guard and lunges for another cleric. Jinnik bolts after it, leaping just in time to intercept the attack. He lands a rush blow, but leaves himself open for a stab from behind. Thankfully, the dwarf's chainmail armor absorbs the impact, leaving the monster in shock when its attack doesn't work. Jinnik seizes the moment, countering with a solid swing to the creature's face, managing to hold the line and allowing the clerics to focus solely on healing. Suddenly, the lizard men freeze as a powerful figure joins the fray, a man who takes down one of the monsters with a single punch. It's Seo Sango, the Titan Guild Master himself. He nods at Jinnik and asks if he was the one who took down all the monsters in the area. Jinnik, a bit confused about who this powerhouse is, admits he was handling things here. The clerics are baffled. How could he not recognize Sango, the infamous S-rank hunter? With no time to spare, Sango heads back into battle, promising to reward Jinnik for his help later. As soon as he steps in, his presence immediately raises everyone's spirits. Everyone except Andon, the deputy guild master, who's clearly irritated. Sango takes charge without hesitation, barking orders and commanding attention from all the hunters. With the area cleared, he unleashes a powerful shockwave attack that sends the lizard men flying. In mere moments, Sango has wiped out the remaining monsters. Satisfied that his guild members are now safe, Sango turns to Andon, grabbing him by the jacket to reprimand him. "What were you thinking, risking your life and the lives of everyone else like that?" Andon claims he just wanted to protect the guild's reputation, but Sango sees through him. "It's not about the guild, is it? It's about your pride." Their tense stare down is broken when one of the guild members reminds Sango to dismiss the clerics who helped secure the area. Sango composes himself and addresses the hunters, thanking them for their efforts, especially Jinnik, who played a key role in keeping everyone alive. As a gesture of gratitude, Sango invites Jinnik to join the Titan Guild directly, skipping the usual registration process. Andon can't hold back, immediately stepping in to belittle Jinnik as just a D rank who got lucky. Sango isn't having it. He reminds Andon that this mere D rank saved countless lives that would have been lost without his determination. Sango then forces Andon to apologize, delivering a heavy blow to his pride. However, Jinnik declines the offer. He's not interested in joining a guild where people like Andon hold authority. That's the final straw for Andon, who lunges at Jinnik with an enhanced punch, only to be met by Jinnik's bat squarely in the stomach. The blow knocks Andon out cold, and the scene soon makes headlines, sparking quite a buzz in the local news. The next day, the higher-ups of the Titan Guild are seething over what happened to Andon. Not only was he publicly embarrassed by a mere C rank, but he was also demoted from his position as Deputy Guildmaster. They demand that this C rank show up before them to explain himself. However, Sango, the Guild Master, isn't having any of it. He points out that Andon not only put multiple guild members at risk for the sake of his pride, but also attempted to attack someone who fought for their guild. That's more than enough reason for a demotion in Sango's eyes. This comment shuts the gathered crowd down, leaving them with nothing to say. Sango sends them on their way, but his thoughts wander back to the extraordinary C rank he witnessed the other day. Before he grows any stronger, he must get Kong Jinnik to join his guild. No matter what, Jinnik is lounging lazily in his apartment, enjoying a drink while reviewing his expenses. Since he made a lot of money from hunting, he spent more than usual, pushing his expenses to an absurd high. If he had known things would turn out this way, he would have accepted the extra pay the Titan Guild offered him. But hey, it doesn't matter. He has a much better way to earn money. After some much-needed relaxation, he heads back into the dungeon to collect more monster corpses. Hunting the same old monsters isn't enough for him anymore. Now that he's stronger, he craves tougher opponents. He ventures deeper into the second floor than usual and finds himself facing off against a small army of orcs. One of them tries to sneak up from behind, but he deftly sidesteps the attack and retaliates, defeating the orc instantly. As several others swarm around him, Jinnik thinks, just a few days ago, I would have been dead on the spot. Thanks to his new equipment, though, he dispatches them with ease. By the end, he counts a total of 20 orc corpses, enough to keep him financially secure for a whole year. Still feeling energetic, he decides to delve even deeper into the dungeon, entering the third floor, ominously named the Temple Guardian's Labyrinth. At first glance, it appears empty, but that calm is shattered by a sudden tremor shaking the ground. A giant hand bursts out beneath him, Jinnik barely manages to dodge it. Thankfully, he's quick on his feet. The hand belongs to a stone golem, an artificial monster built from mana. Its attacks are too fast for him to dodge, and even when he blocks them, the force sends him staggering back. With limited options left, he realizes that the golem is incredibly strong but lacks the intelligence to wield that strength effectively. Taking advantage of this, Jinnik lands a blow on its head, shattering it into pieces. But wait! The golem starts to reform. Oh right, golems can only be defeated by breaking their core. Jinnik exclaims, remembering this crucial detail just a moment too late. As he tries to retreat and formulate a strategy, the monster regenerates its hand quickly enough to catch him before he can escape. Just when he thinks he's trapped, an arrow flies in and strikes the golem in the chest. Seizing the opportunity, Jinnik follows up with a sharp jab from his bat, breaking the core and defeating it once and for all. He turns to thank his mysterious savior, but instead of the dwarf he expected, he's met with a beautiful woman sporting some peculiar ears. An elf, he thinks. Bowing his head, he thanks her for saving him, but he doesn't notice as she rushes toward him. Before he knows it, she grabs him by the collar, pulling him in for a little interrogation. I haven't seen you in this dungeon before. Who are you? And where did you come from? She demands, her curiosity unyielding. Clearly, she's not from Jinnik's world. His outfit looks entirely unfamiliar. As he struggles to escape her grip, she bombards him with questions. Eventually, she lets him go after he mentions that he entered the dungeon today. That means you know where the entrance is, she exclaims, shoving him to the ground before dropping her bow. Finally, I've found a way out of this dungeon. Jinnik stands up, demanding to know what's going on with her sudden aggression. But the elf ignores him, insisting that he take her to the exit. Not impressed by her boldness, he rolls his eyes but thinks, she is really pretty though. I guess I can let it slide for now. If you guide me out of the dungeon, I'll compensate you handsomely, she promises. After all, I'm a platinum-rank mercenary, so you can trust me. Her name is Lucia, and she's a half-elf who prides herself on being somewhat famous. Surely, he must have heard of her somewhere. But Jinnik has no idea what she's talking about. When she insists that she's a platinum-rank mercenary and shows him her badge, he still has never seen or heard of such a thing. Did you come from some rural area? How do you not know what this badge is? She exclaims, confusion etched across her face. I'm from Seoul, Korea, he replies, and her expression shifts to one of bewilderment. Wait, what? Seoul, Korea? Lucia realizes that the crazy mage might have actually succeeded in his dimension-hopping spell. A mage from my dimension cast a spell on this dungeon that caused it to hop over into yours, she explains. That sounds completely impossible to Jinnik, but it seems that this is exactly what happened. However, since it was a dimensional shift, reversing the magic will allow her to return to her world. Jinnik had felt something was odd, but it turns out this dungeon isn't even from his world. If it returns to its original location, that could spell trouble for him. He asks her if she plans to send the dungeon back immediately, but she can't. It would be too difficult to reverse the magic here, she replies. But there's a potential location that could help. It's a hidden room on this floor that I found a long while ago while searching for an exit. She asks for his help in getting to the hidden room and promises to reward him for his assistance. The conditions don't seem too bad, so he agrees to help her reach it. As they make their way, they fight off a few orcs, and Jinhook notices that she's a lot stronger than he initially thought. That arrow she fired earlier? No joke. Fighting her here would definitely be a disadvantage for him. His safest bet? Cooperate with her and continue assessing the situation. After a little more walking, they decide to rest at a safe spot. Jinhook had packed some chocolates in his pockets for emergencies, and he hands one to her. She takes a liking to it immediately and demands more. After munching through his entire supply, she asks for even more. Unfortunately, that was the last one, and she seems satisfied enough to continue the journey, at least for now. Eventually, they reach a large room that holds the boss of the dungeon. Lucia believes there's a chance the mage's spell could be in that room. To investigate, they'll need to take down the boss. She tells him that he doesn't have to do much. All he needs to do is help her finish it off. Once she takes it down, they can open the door. As soon as they enter, the monster lets out an angry roar before launching an attack. Lucia charges up an arrow and aims straight at the boss's chest. "Watch me closely," she exclaims like some kind of superhero. Then she uses a technique called aura to increase the impact of her attack. She fires the arrow, and it hits the boss head-on, knocking it onto its back. Just one of her attacks was enough to bring down that massive armored monster. Talk about a show-off. Now, Gene Hook has to finish the job before the creature gets back up. Just like with the golems, he has to aim for the core. He jumps onto the fallen creature's chest and bashes his bat right where he believes the core should be. One hit doesn't seem to be enough to bring it down, and suddenly, a large fist rushes at him from the side. He narrowly blocks it with one of his cleric skills, the Holy Shield, like a true pro. Using his momentum, he pushes himself back onto its chest. If one hit isn't enough, then he'll just keep bashing it until it stops moving. Eventually, he manages to bust the core open, and the creature is finally defeated. Level up, almost reaching 200 at this point. Now that the creature is down for the count, he returns to Lucia and asks her to teach him how to use aura. But he already used aura. His shield skill transformed his holy cleric power into aura. To him, it was just a class skill. Lucia, however, doesn't know what that is. But hey, if he can use skills like that, it seems he'll be able to learn how to wield aura faster than she thought. With his potential, he might even be able to start enhancing his attacks with aura right away. But first, there's a condition. She sends him back to get more chocolates for her. Meanwhile, back in the city, Sango walks alongside his secretary, Lee Hyena, discussing a new anomaly that appeared near Gangnam Station. It was detected yesterday, meaning they have about 5 days to prepare before a powerful monster crashes the party. No matter how Sango pictures it, there's no way his guild is going to handle this one alone. However, all the other major guilds have been dispatched overseas, leaving the Titan Guild as the only one left in Korea to fight. Hyena continues searching for capable hunters who are freelancing locally, but none of them seem reliable. Sango, however, has his sights set on someone else. Coincidentally, that someone just happens to be crossing the street. He excuses himself from the conversation with his secretary and chases after Gene Hook, who's carrying home a large box of snacks that the elf asked him to get. When the guild master's voice catches his attention, he offers his proposal for Gene Hook to join the Titan Guild once more. But Gene Hook doesn't have any plans to change his mind. In that case, Sango offers Gene Hook a job as a mercenary, so he can still work for the guild without being a part of it. The reward sounds substantial, which piques Gene Hook's interest, but he promises to only think about it. Classic. He returns to the dungeon and presents the snacks to the elf. She happily devours them all, and it's clear they don't have this kind of food in her world. After her hearty meal, Gene Hook asks her why she's eating down in the basement when they've already defeated the boss monster. She points up at a magic circle on the ceiling and explains that it connects the dungeon to the world he lives in. Because of this, she'll be staying down there for the time being to study it. So, if he wants to learn more about aura, he's going to need to bring her more chocolates. Now that she's done eating, she takes his hand to teach him how to use aura. Firstly, she needs to pour her aura into his body to show him what it feels like. As Gene Hook feels the power flowing into him, Lucia notices a spike of energy. It seems he has more talent for this than she initially expected. The movement of holy power coursing through him is impressive enough that she believes he'll grasp the basics by the end of the day. She commends him for his talent and asks if he can remember the flow of aura in his body. Confidently, he assures her he can, and she acknowledges him with a nod. Before turning to leave the dungeon, she mentions that she was supposed to investigate the magic circle first, but it seems faster to train him on how to use aura. And the best way to do that? Practical experience. She takes him to a different part of the dungeon and tosses him into a horde of monsters. Surprise, she seems to say, as he finds himself fighting an army of goblins and kobolds all at once. Surprisingly, he manages to hold his own while also collecting their corpses. Turning to Lucia, he asks, "Why am I suddenly fighting a horde of monsters when you said I'd be learning how to use aura?" She shrugs. "This is how you learn. Even though I infused a bit of mana into your body so you could feel it, you need to sense the rest on your own. Just activate aura using your holy power. There's no better way to get the instinct for it than in the middle of real combat. Jin-hook is more upset that she didn't mention any of this beforehand and instead just threw him into action with no warning. As they're fighting, the ground starts to shake and a stone golem emerges from the earth. It lets out a loud roar and pushes Jin-hook away, as Lucia explains that he needs to face a true crisis to unlock his potential. All you have to do is focus and try to feel the holy power coming from the shield you generate with your skill. The shield is made of aura, so once you get the hang of it, you'll pick it up quickly. Easier said than done, especially since he doesn't consciously activate the holy shield. How am I supposed to feel any aura from something that turns on automatically? He wonders. Just then, the monster brings down a huge fist toward him, and he blocks it with the holy shield again. This time, though, he feels something, a strange energy gathering around his left hand, the one activating the skill. This must be what holy power feels like. The golem attacks again, and Jin-hook summons his holy shield once more. Except this time, it has a different shape than he remembers. The sensation of summoning the shield is also different. This must be mana, he thinks. But the golem doesn't give him time to figure all this out and smashes down on the shield, sending Jin-hook flying back. Lucia mocks him from her podium, saying, "I told you to get the hang of your skill, not to make foolish mistakes." He was just doing what she told him to, though. As he prepares for another attack, a status window appears in front of him. He has acquired a new skill called Holy Power Application. This skill allows him to use Holy Power to enhance his attack and defense based on how much Holy Power is used. Wait, so there are ways to gain skills beyond just a job change, he thinks. Lucia notices him spacing out and decides to take matters into her own hands. It seems that facing a golem while learning aura is too much for you, she remarks, offering to take care of it from there. But Jin-hook quickly recovers himself and tells her to stand down. Now that I have a grasp on my new powers, I should be able to handle everything. He charges at the golem, leaping off the ground to narrowly dodge another stone fist aiming right at him. While in the air, he focuses his mana on the bat and uses a front flip to gain more momentum before bringing the mana-enhanced bat down onto the golem's head. The monster falls, but he's not satisfied yet. He lands on its chest and focuses one more time, trying to channel even more mana into his bat before bringing it down right onto the golem's chest. At that moment, he unlocks a new skill called Holy Aura. With his enhanced weapon, he stabs the golem and successfully breaks the core. Unlocking his Holy Aura also allows him to gain new skills like Precision Strike and Unyielding. Thanks to Lucia's training, he unlocked 2 passive skills and an active skill. But Lucia is more concerned about the fact that he learned how to use aura in battle so quickly. She was expecting to just teach him the basics and call it a day, but now she has to see this through to the end. She takes one of her arrows and brings down a wall, opening up the area to an even larger horde of monsters. Jin-hook is not impressed, but he readies his bat and prepares for another battle. Here we go again, he thinks, steeling himself for the chaos ahead. The battle with the monsters in the dungeon takes a lot out of him, and by the time he goes to sell the monster corpses, he's exhausted. He looks so tired that the black market boss, Jinu, notices him when they meet. Jin-hook appears as if he just emerged from a war zone. Jinu decides not to ask too many questions and gets down to business, accepting the monster corpses. He brings up the topic of the alcohol he sold to them last time, marketing it as traditional artisan soju. Since it hit the market, orders have been flooding in, and the drink has become incredibly popular in a short time. I could focus on selling liquor and never worry about money again. Jinu muses. With enough money to last him for the rest of his life and a small business already set up, Jin-hook heads home to rest. His training with Lucia has left him immensely tired, and just seconds after lying down in bed, he passes out. Not long after, he's jolted awake by the sound of a disaster alert. A loud, automated voice urges everyone on the street to evacuate and get to safety. Today is the day of the monster invasion, but it seems to have come early this month. Monster invasions usually happen randomly, but there's a certain one that occurs after a set period of 1 month. This invasion is pretty common, and usually, Hook would seize the opportunity to catch some low-level monsters for some quick cash. This time, though, he's too tired to care. The large guilds will take care of it anyway, right? He thinks. That was the plan until a notification pops up on his phone, informing him that due to the urgency of the invasion, the rewards for monsters would be tripled. With triple the rewards up for grabs, Hook can't ignore the invasion anymore. He steps out onto the street to see if he can take some monsters down and cash in. Meanwhile, security officials guide people and try to clear the streets while the Titan Guild battles hordes of monsters running through the city. The security line is already breaking due to the number of monsters trying to push through, and Sango is running out of stamina to keep up the fight. No matter how many he takes down, more just keep popping up. The guild members are already at their limits, and even though it looks like they have the upper hand, things aren't looking too promising. The guild's secretary watches the fight worriedly from behind safety. Even though everything seems to be going well thanks to the guild master, she can tell they're getting stretched thin. If only they had one more powerful hunter to turn the tide. Her mind wanders to a man the guild master found promising not too long ago. She takes her phone and calls Hook. He's in the middle of fighting some goblins when he picks up. She offers him a chance to fight with the Titan Guild, promising hefty compensation in return. He asks for 5 times the normal compensation, and she suggests they meet at a predetermined place to discuss more. When they meet, she offers him 4 times the compensation instead, and he reluctantly agrees. She hands him a device that will keep track of how many monsters he kills, so they can calculate his contribution to the guild. If you make more than an average contribution to the fight, you'll get everything you're asking for. Now that he's got a chance to show off his abilities and get properly paid for it, he takes off toward the fight to lend a hand. The secretary watches him leave, wondering if he'll live up to the expectations that Sango has of him. He was once able to take down an Anyan by pure luck, but his skills are still uncertain. He arrives on the battlefield and immediately targets a rampaging ogre, shocking the crowd. In one quick strike, he manages to kill it, leading everyone else to believe he must be at least an A-rank hunter. A rank is close, he thinks, but I have to be stronger than an A rank with my current abilities. He takes a moment to drink a mana potion to recharge. Thanks to Lucia's intense training, he's reached level 200. Normally, he wouldn't be able to face an ogre, but as long as his mana doesn't run out, he should be able to keep up with an S-rank hunter. Right now, he has over 1,500 mana potions, which means all the monsters around him are just money makers. Elsewhere, Doan takes down monsters alongside his guild members. He notices the monsters are drastically decreasing and turns to see a group watching someone take down monsters with ease. Curious, he checks on them and sees the one person he hates the most right now, Hook. He yells orders to the stunned hunters, telling them to stop daydreaming and go back to fighting monsters. Why is this guy here, and who invited him? Just seeing Hook reminds him of their last encounter, where his embarrassing moment was broadcast all over the news. That last time must have been due to a lot of luck, but this time, since he's alone, there'll be no problem taking him out and putting him in his place. With that in mind, he rushes toward Hook, hoping to fix his nasty habit of being in the worst place at the wrong time. Unluckily for him, the C-rank hunter notices him far too early and counters his attack, sending Yin flying and knocking him out yet again. Sorry, not today, Hook thinks as he brushes off the commotion. Meanwhile, Sango stares down a rampaging Minotaur. His mana is almost gone, and he's out of stamina. The Minotaur raises its club to attack, just as Sango contemplates retreating to regain his stamina. But before it can hit him, a voice calls out behind him. Hook jumps in from above, grabs the Minotaur by the horn, and slams it into the ground. For a C-rank hunter to take down a Minotaur in one hit, it looks like his judgment about Hook was spot on. As he takes down the monster, Sango approaches to show his appreciation for the help. Hook shrugs it off, saying, "The guild master called me and promised a hefty pay in return for my help, so there's no need to thank me." Sango then takes this chance to ask him again to join their guild. "If you join forces with us, opportunities like this will keep popping up." Hook takes a moment to consider it and finally replies, Once we finish up with the remaining monsters, then I'll think about it. As they talk, Sango receives a call from Hyena. She tells him to look at the sky, where the clouds have turned black, and the weather has become fiery, crackling with lightning. Something huge and menacing lurks among the clouds, and it does not appear friendly. The creature shoots lightning down at everything, targeting both monsters and hunters while damaging buildings as it flies overhead. It's so high in the sky that their skills can't reach it, leaving them with no way to attack. Sango suggests returning to his guild to assess the situation and invites Jinnik to join him. Reluctantly, Jinnik agrees, and they reconvene in his office. They run various tests, only to find that nothing they've done so far can affect the creature or defend against its attacks. Every attempt to stop it has been nullified or destroyed. They realize they need something with immense firepower capable of long-range destruction. Lucia immediately comes to mind, and Sango recognizes that there may be a way to bring it down after all. As Jinnik leaves to fetch Lucia, the executives of the Titan Guild gather to discuss Sango's apparent favoritism toward the Sea Ranker. The other guild members brainstorm alternative methods to defeat the monster without relying on Jinnik, but they find themselves with no other choice. All other strategies are guaranteed to fail, leaving them with only the option to trust the one hunter with a plan. They consider calling the Gudea Guild, a large group filled with A-rank and higher mages, but no, they don't care about casualties. Inviting them would likely lead to many deaths. The room falls silent as they acknowledge their limited options. Meanwhile, Jinnik emerges from the portal with Lucia, thanking her for agreeing to help and promising her as many sweet treats as she desires in return. They ascend to the top of the Titan Guild headquarters, where Jinnik shows her the monster terrorizing their city. He asks if she can take it down, and she confidently assures him that she can. The monster is so large that she could hit it with her eyes closed. It's a level 300 creature, the highest ever recorded, and she says she can eliminate it, but first she needs some assistance. The building's roof can't withstand her power, so she asks Jinnik to prepare a shield to absorb most of the impact. Not wanting to see multiple buildings destroyed, Jinnik calls the guild leader to inquire about the potential damage once they take down the monster. Sango tells him not to worry about collateral damage and to focus solely on bringing the creature down. With that settled, Jinnik prepares the shield while Lucia charges 2 arrows to strike the beast. She aims carefully and releases the arrows, creating a massive shockwave that pushes Jinnik back, even with the shield. The 2 shots soar through the sky and land a direct hit on the monster, obliterating half its body from the impact. The Titan Guild watches in awe from the ground, amazed that Jinnik managed to pull it off so effortlessly. Hunter Kong Jinnik continues to impress. The whiplash from Lucia's attack leaves smoking trails on the building's helipad. While it wasn't the time to hold back, this was excessive. Lucia, on the other hand, is disappointed that the monster was so weak, attributing her ease in defeating it to her immense strength. Regardless, the job is done, and it's time for her to head back. She hands Jinnik a tracker that monitors his points, showing a staggering 240 points. Before leaving, she warns him not to place too much trust in others, especially when money is at stake. People's minds tend to cloud with greed. She advises him to be wary, as she has learned from her many adventures. Jinnik assures her he'll be fine and will handle anything that seems off. They part ways, and he heads down to the street where he's met by Sango and his secretary. They catch up with him and ask how he managed to take down such a formidable monster alone. Jinnik politely declines to share, calling it a secret. One of the executives is offended and doesn't believe a mere sea ranker could defeat such a giant beast. However, Jinnik shows them the monster tracker, displaying a substantial number of points, proving he indeed took it down. Sango stops the executive there and apologizes to Jinnik for the outburst. The executive watches in anger, feeling Sango favors a sea ranker over his guild members. He decides it's time for a change, as Sango is hindering the guild's future. He pulls out his phone and dials an unknown number. By the next day, rumors spread throughout the city that an ordinary sea ranker defeated the giant monster. Members of the Titan Guild are skeptical, but verifying the information isn't too difficult. Word also circulates that the guild master personally offered Jinnik direct entry into the Titan Guild, which he turned down. He must be confident in his skills to reject such a significant offer from Sango himself. The rumors even reached the Allron Guild, who learned that Andoin has been hospitalized after the monster invasion. Known for his impressive skills, it's revealed he was defeated by the rumored C-rank hunter. If this is true, the rumors hold some weight. The Allron Guild scouts decide to meet with Jinnik to verify the information. He might have unlocked a hidden class, which is exceptionally rare for hunters. If that's the case, they need to recruit him into their guild before another guild takes him, or they eliminate him. Meanwhile, Jinnik sleeps soundly after the battle, having exhausted all his stamina. He passes out as soon as he gets the chance, and wakes up 2 days later, realizing the toll of overexertion. He walks into his living room and finds that Lucia has created a massive mess with all the snacks he bought her. She managed to eat everything in just 2 days. With no food left in the fridge, her only option was to consume the snacks. Since he hadn't opened the portal for her, she couldn't return to the dungeon. This confuses Jinnik, as he's never needed to open the portal before. It's always been accessible. He heads to the attic to show her that the portal is indeed open. But this doesn't make sense to her, since there was nothing there moments ago. She instructs him to step away from the door, then reopens it, revealing that there's nothing there now that he's stepped back. Jinnik is baffled, as he has only ever seen the dungeon open. Lucia theorizes that the dungeon responds only to him, suggesting it's imprinted directly on him, meaning it could have fallen on his head. Luckily, it was a failed spell. He decides not to dwell on that, and instead orders food for both of them. Lucia wonders how he found his way back to the house after they defeated the monster. She explains that she placed a recognition suppression spell on it, which should have made it impossible to locate. Jinnik asks why she would cast such a spell on his house. She reveals that strange individuals from some guild named Allron had been visiting while he slept, which annoyed her enough to ensure they could never return. Jinnik is perplexed as to why those large guilds would be searching for him. He pulls out his phone to discover what happened during his slumber. The first headline he sees grabs his attention. News of him defeating the giant monster has gone viral. A video circulates that clearly shows him fighting alongside the Titan Guild, and it seems he has become famous overnight. This newfound attention is problematic. His greed in using Lucia's power has placed him under a spotlight. The hunter industry is territorial, and strong competitors are swiftly eliminated. He resolves not to dwell on the past. With Lucia done eating, they return to the dungeon to deliver their loot to the dwarf. Thanks to Lucia's powerful shot, the monster's body is too damaged to salvage, leaving them only with its head. The old man is frustrated with Lucia for overdoing it and ruining valuable material, revealing a natural animosity between them. Jinnik interrupts their argument, asking the dwarf if he can craft something from the corpse. The dwarf digs out an organ from the head, which allows it to produce lightning. With that, Jinnik can enchant his baseball bat to create lightning as well. He inquires how the dwarf would like to be compensated, but the dwarf simply wants Lucia to leave his workshop. Angered, Lucia shakes with rage, and Jinnik has to calm her down by promising more sweets. After barely preventing her from shooting a hole through the dwarf's head, he heads back into the city to buy her the promised treats. On his way back home, Jean-Hook senses something lurking in an alleyway. It seems like someone is tracking him. With a quick flick, he drops his groceries behind a wall and calls out to the creep following him. "Hey, I can see you, you know." A voice answers back, surprised that Jean-Hook noticed him at all. Suddenly, a figure appears out of nowhere and rushes at him, swinging a sword. Jean-Hook barely manages to block the attack with his bat. The newcomer is astonished that Jean-Hook could even see him, confirming the rumors. Jean-Hook is more than just an ordinary C-rank. "Guess I'll have to show you just how ordinary I am," Jean-Hook thinks as he pushes the attacker back and leaps at him for a counterattack. Since the attacker wants to keep his identity a secret, Jean-Hook decides he'll just have to beat some sense out of him until he spills the beans. However, the attacker has a different plan. He uses a skill to turn himself invisible. Jean-Hook can just faintly feel his presence, enough to dodge and block most of the attacks, but he knows he can't keep this up forever. If only he had his usual bat. But the old dwarf is working on it, so he's stuck with a regular aluminum bat. This is going to be a long day, he thinks, realizing he needs to make a run for it. Just as he decides to escape, the hooded attacker attaches a tracking device to his shirt. Jin-hook sprints toward a crowded area, hoping to hide, but the attacker's device allows him to track his every move. The trail leads to a bathroom in a department store. Perfect, he mutters, camouflaging himself. He kicks open a stall door, ready to pounce. Except there's nothing there but the tracker stuck to the wall. Seriously? A bathroom trap? Jin-hook realizes he's been played. Just as he's about to kick himself for falling for that, the assassin charges up a fireball, aiming straight at Jin-hook and the poor kid who just wanted to use the toilet. With no time to spare, Jin-hook throws up a shield to protect them both. The assassin uses the smoke as cover to escape. Great, a fireball and a runaway, he thinks, shaking his head. As he tries to catch his breath, an object suddenly stabs right through the assassin's chest, killing him instantly. Oops, Jin-hook says, blinking in surprise. I didn't mean to kill him. Just as he's lamenting the situation, a status window pops up in front of him. It acknowledges the murder, but labels it as self-defense. Well, that's a relief, he sighs, but I could have done without the drama. Before he can process it further, two detectives approach him, asking questions about the incident. He tries his best to cooperate, explaining how he was just minding his own business when chaos erupted. Luckily, since he didn't receive the villain trait, the detectives don't suspect him of foul play. They confirm he was acting in self-defense and let him go, but not before warning him not to mention the words murder, self-defense, or villain. They hand him a device that will monitor his every word. Great, a babysitter, he mutters under his breath as they let him go. As Jin-hook heads home, he can't shake off the feeling that he's become the center of attention in the hunter community. The detectives speculate among themselves, noting how he managed to block a powerful attack while protecting a child and took down a high-level hunter. There's no way this guy is just a C rank, they murmur. I hope he doesn't do anything to lose our trust. Back at home, Jin-hook checks out his new class, the Inquisitor. It seems to build off his cleric abilities, but with a twist. His skills are now more self-focused, allowing him to act like a tank while healing himself. Plus, he gains the ability to see the karma of others. Great! Now I can judge people on top of everything else, he quips, shaking his head at the irony. Excited to test out his new powers, he returns to the dwarf's workshop. As promised, his weapon has been enchanted to send out lightning attacks. All he has to do is think about it, and it sends out up to 3 charged lightning blasts. Talk about shocking, he chuckles, already envisioning the chaos he could unleash. However, Lucia is less impressed. I can't sense any holy power from you now, she says, looking concerned. What did you do in the human world? He shrugs, explaining he can't share much because of the monitoring device. The dwarf, overhearing, offers to dispose of the device if Jin-hook completes a simple task. Retrieve an item from a dangerous location using a compass he provides. Me? A rookie? Dangerous? Sounds like a fun day. Jin-hook exclaims, grinning. This little errand had dragged Jin-hook to a treacherous, mountainous path that seemed to defy all logic. Steep cliffs, impossible terrain. Who in their right mind would come here willingly? And yet, here he was, armed with nothing but some basic hiking gear, rappelling down what looked like a bottomless pit. All this effort just to mine some ores? That old dwarf really had no shame, sending him into a death trap over some shiny rocks. Meanwhile, Lucia was having the time of her life. While Jin-hook wrestled with his gear and tried not to fall to his doom, she leaned back casually, watching his struggle like it was prime entertainment. Amused by his efforts, she teased him, wondering if he was really struggling this much just to go down. From her perspective, this was nothing, and she made sure he knew it. If he wanted to make it out in one piece, he had one job. Follow her lead, stick to her instructions, and under no circumstances should he act on his own unless he wanted to experience a tragic, yet slightly comedic death. And then, as if to prove how easy it really was, she took a step forward and jumped. No ropes, no hesitation, just a confident leap into the abyss. Jin-hook barely had time to react before she was already scaling down the rock face with nothing but her hands, landing effortlessly like she'd done this 100 times before. Of course, she had to show off. Jin Hyuk sighed, knowing full well he couldn't just do what she did, at least not without breaking a few bones in the process. Lucia, however, saw things differently. From her point of view, he wasn't just being careful, he was babying himself. If he kept acting like a fragile porcelain doll, he was never going to realize what his body was actually capable of. With a mischievous grin, she remarked that he was just limiting himself, fearing for no reason at all. And then, just to drive her point home, she dove headfirst into the pit, completely unbothered. Jin Hyuk stared after her, torn between admiration and irritation. It was unbelievable, but maybe she was right. His body had changed. He was stronger, faster. He just wasn't used to thinking of himself that way. Maybe he was being too cautious. Taking a deep breath, he loosened his grip on the rope and muttered to himself before letting go. The moment he free fell, adrenaline flooded his system. The wind roared past his ears, and for a second, doubt crept in. But as he neared the bottom, instinct took over. Using his hands and legs, he braced against the rocky walls, slowing himself down just enough to land beside Lucia, completely unscathed. She barely looked impressed, arms crossed. She raised a brow and remarked that it had taken him long enough. Jin Hyuk exhaled, half in relief, half in annoyance. He admitted, grudgingly, that she might have had a point. Lucia simply smirked, her confidence unwavering. She always had a point. As much as he wanted to argue, the truth was undeniable. He was not a normal human anymore. He had been holding himself back for no reason. And judging by the satisfied look on Lucia's face, she had known it all along. Taking a break in the middle of their mission, they settled on a steep cliff, gazing at the endless landscape below. The conversation naturally drifted toward what had happened outside. Lucia, arms crossed, voiced her concern. Removing the device might end up getting Jin Hyuk in trouble. But the old dwarf had been oddly confident about it, saying it would be fine. That meant there had to be a way. For all his grumpy outbursts, that blacksmith was undeniably talented. Even Lucia, who made no effort to hide her distaste for the old man, had to admit that when it came to things like this, the dwarf was reliable. She still didn't like him, but she had no choice but to trust his craftsmanship. Shifting the conversation, Lucia's curiosity turned to something else, karma values. Specifically, the ones tied to Jin Hyuk's new class. She asked about her own level, and after a quick check, he informed her that she had 82, the highest among the three of them. Jin Hyuk himself sat at 64, while the old dwarf had 72. The numbers didn't surprise her. Considering the life she had led, it made sense that she had the highest karma. She had done everything she could just to survive. Even so, the difference between her and Jin Hyuk was a mere 20 points, and he had only killed one person so far. Lucia, on the other hand, had long since lost count. That thought led her to an interesting comparison. In the world she used to live in, there were saints, beings who could distinguish good from evil with just a glance. Jin Hyuk immediately dismissed the idea that he was anything close to a saint, and she agreed without hesitation. That wasn't the point, though. She was merely saying that the ability to gauge evil existed across different worlds. Not that she cared much about that right now. Truthfully, she had little interest in wasting time searching for a mine just to satisfy the old fart. What had interested her, however, was Jin Hyuk's new abilities. She was eager to thoroughly analyze them. And when he asked why she was so invested, she simply shrugged and replied that she found him entertaining. And she wasn't wrong. Watching him figure things out was much more interesting than staying holed up in an abandoned dungeon. They needed a better way to understand karma values, and Lucia had a simple solution. Go outside and do some real experiments. Jin Hyuk hesitated. He felt bad about pausing their mission for the old dwarf, but Lucia had a point. Staying in the dungeon with just the two of them wouldn't give him any deeper understanding of his abilities. After a brief moment of contemplation, he reached into his pocket. Even if he felt a little guilty about ditching the dwarf's request, his curiosity won out. Fishing out a return stone, he held it between his fingers. This particular stone had been set to instantly transport him to a predetermined location outside. With a firm squeeze, he crushed it. A dimensional rift split open right where they stood. Lucia barely had a second to react before she was swallowed up by the portal, her momentary surprise vanishing into the void. Strangely enough, using the stone caused Jin Hyuk's karma to rise. A few minutes later, The duo found themselves in the middle of a bustling city street. Crowds moved in waves, neon signs flickered to life, and the air buzzed with energy. Lucia, unfazed by the chaos, casually sipped her drink, while Jin Hyuk sat across from her, quietly panicking over how her so-called camouflage magic was completely failing its job. She had assured him earlier that she was using magic to disguise her true appearance and blend into the crowd. Technically, she wasn't lying. Her pointed ears and otherworldly features were hidden. But the illusion of human clothing didn't change the fact that she looked too perfect. Her silver hair, flawless skin, and effortless grace drew attention no matter what she wore. Every passerby stole glances at the stunning woman sitting across from Jin Hyuk, some even outright staring. Lucia, of course, had no complaints. With a sly smirk, she casually pointed out that her beauty simply couldn't be concealed, even with magic. Camouflage had its limits, after all. Jin Hyuk wanted to disagree. Really, he did, but even he had to admit that she was probably the most breathtaking woman he had ever seen. And the worst part? She knew it. Deciding to move on before she got even more smug, Lucia steered the conversation to something more important: their investigation into karma values. So far, their findings were straightforward. Doing bad things increase karma. And it didn't always take something extreme. Jin Hyuk himself had gained a single karma point just for breaking his promise to the old dwarf. Apparently, it wasn't just about hurting people. Betrayal, deception, and even irresponsibility could contribute. On the other hand, harm that was consensual, like a fight in self-defense, wouldn't raise karma at all. The exact scale of karma still wasn't clear, but one rule stood out. Once a person's karma exceeded 200 points, they were officially labeled as a villain. At that point, killing them wouldn't even count as murder. It would be classified as self-defense. Essentially, the system stopped seeing them as human. And considering that even Lucia and the old dwarf hadn't reached 100 points, getting past 200 wasn't just a bad habit. It took dedicated villainy. Jin Hyuk had been quietly scanning people throughout the day, checking for any ridiculously high karma values. So far, the most he had seen from a regular pedestrian was somewhere around 50. If they wanted real data, they were wasting their time in a peaceful public area. They needed to go somewhere darker. Thankfully, the city had just the place, the red light district. As night fell, the streets lit up with a kaleidoscope of neon signs. Flashy billboards, pulsing music, the smell of cheap alcohol. This was where the city's real underbelly thrived. Lucia's reaction was immediate fascination. The dazzling lights, the vibrant energy. Earth had its fair share of wonders, and this was one of them. But as she observed the lively crowd, a thought struck her. Shouldn't people be more worried about getting attacked by monsters? In her world, nobody in their right mind would gather in such a bright, noisy place unless they had a death wish. Jin Hyuk barely held back a sigh as he explained that Earth didn't work that way. Monsters didn't casually roam the streets like they did in her world. There were no sudden ambushes, no lurking dangers, at least not of the magical kind. Lucia wrinkled her nose at the air, unimpressed. The atmosphere here felt off, heavy and artificial, nothing like the crisp wilderness she was used to. But still, the lights were pretty. Every world had its own bright sides, after all. As they walked through the seedy streets, a shady-looking barman approached with an exaggerated grin, his eyes lingering a little too long on Lucia. He showered her with compliments, calling her the most stunning lady to grace these parts. With an eager tone, he mentioned an ongoing event at his bar. Beautiful women could enjoy up to 5 cocktails completely free. Lucia barely acknowledged him. Without breaking her stride, she simply shoved him aside and continued walking. Before she could get far, Jin Hyuk placed a firm hand on her shoulder, stopping her in her tracks. He suggested that they take a moment to enjoy those free drinks, insisting that it would be a waste to turn down such a generous offer. The barman, now practically glowing with excitement, eagerly led them inside, promising that Lucia would receive the best service the establishment had to offer. After walking all day and only encountering ordinary people with unimpressive karmic values, Jin Hyuk finally found what he was looking for. The barman, an irredeemable villain, had a whopping 300 negative karma floating above his head. Settling in at the bar, the duo received their drinks and took a sip. The cocktail had a sweet, smooth flavor, something Lucia immediately approved of. Meanwhile, the barman stood a few steps away, quietly snickering to himself. Those two had no idea what they had just consumed. A single drop of the poison-laced liquor was enough to paralyze an average person. There was no escaping it. The moment he saw them relaxing, he subtly signaled a group of thugs waiting in the shadows. They stepped forward, their focus locked onto Jin Hyuk. The plan was simple: take him out first. Jin Hyuk, however, barely acknowledged their presence. He simply took another sip and asked if they were sure this was the route they wanted to take. The thugs hesitated for a split second, confused by his calm demeanor. That was when the realization hit. The poison wasn't working. Thanks to his status effect resistance, the so-called fast-acting toxin was nothing more than an overpriced juice to him. Without warning, Jin Hyuk spun around and delivered a bone-crushing uppercut to the nearest thug, sending him staggering backward. Finally, some action. It had been a while since he could properly stretch his limbs, and these street rats looked like the perfect warm-up. With a smirk, he pulled back and threw another devastating punch, this time knocking two goons out at once, sending them flying like ragdolls. A 2-for-1 deal. Not bad. The remaining thugs barely had time to react before he pivoted sharply, shifting his weight for a brutal kick. His foot connected with another thug's face, and with just a single strike, the man collapsed, unconscious before he even hit the floor. Meanwhile, Lucia's eyes fluttered open as the effects of the paralytic poison finally wore off. Groggy but alert, she turned her head to assess the situation, only to find a pile of bodies scattered across the bar floor. Confused, she glanced at Jin Hyuk. He simply shrugged, mentioning that he was just cleaning up some trash. The barman, now visibly sweating, decided it was time to bring out his trump card. With a desperate yell, he signaled for his strongest fighter to step in. A towering man with a buzz cut cracked his knuckles as he removed his jacket, muscles bulging through his shirt. This wasn't just some random thug. He was a fighter. The moment he charged forward with impressive speed, both Jin Hyuk and Lucia watched him with complete indifference. Jin Hyuk kept his gaze locked on the approaching brute, analyzing his movements. Meanwhile, Lucia, unfazed, casually reached for another shot of the poison cocktail and asked if he needed any help. Jin Hyuk waved her off. One more thug wasn't enough to make him break a sweat. Buzzcut, however, was less than amused. The duo was talking about him, as if he was some kind of background character. Enraged, he swung his heaviest punch, aiming straight for Jin Hyuk's face, only for his fist to be stopped midair by a perfectly timed grab. No matter how much he strained, pushed, or twisted, he couldn't move Jin Hyuk an inch. A terrifying realization dawned on him. This wasn't just some random troublemaker. The sheer strength behind that grip meant only one thing. Jin Hyuk had to be a hunter. But that didn't make sense. If he was strong enough to be a hunter, why was he wasting his time in a dingy bar fighting low-level criminals? While Buzzcut desperately tried to figure out a way out of this situation, Jin Hyuk casually tightened his grip ever so slightly, until a sickening crack echoed through the bar. A scream of pure agony ripped from Buzzcut's throat as multiple bones in his hand shattered all at once. But Jin Hyuk wasn't done yet. To shut him up, he followed up with a devastating punch straight to the man's mouth. Buzzcut flew backward like a rag doll, crashing into a line of bar stools, his momentum finally stopping as he slumped against the debris. With every last goon taken care of, only one piece of scum remained, the terrified barman. Jin Hyuk moved like a wild beast, closing the distance in a flash before locking the man into a chokehold. The villain's windpipe nearly collapsed under the relentless pressure as he clawed at Jin Hyuk's arm, struggling for air. But mercy wasn't on the table. Lifting the barman off the ground, he cut off his oxygen completely. The interrogation had begun. And, of course, what kind of interrogation would it be without a few warm-up hits? Jin Hyuk didn't hold back. Fists rained down without hesitation, painting the bar walls with the barman's blood. By the time he was done, his own knuckles were dripping red, and the man's face was swollen beyond recognition. Only when he was satisfied did he finally get to the real questions. It was obvious this wasn't the barman's first time pulling something like this. To run an operation like this under the radar, he had to have someone backing him up. Yet, even with his face barely intact, he continued to deny any involvement with a bigger power. There was no way a worthless thug like him could repeatedly spike drinks and abduct women without getting caught. And those hired gangsters? They weren't just some street-level punks. Someone had to be pulling the strings. Jin Hyuk narrowed his eyes, giving the barman one last chance to talk. The villain, still stubborn, shook his head. Either he was ridiculously loyal, or whoever was behind this was more terrifying than the beating he was taking now. There was only one way to find out. Without warning, Jin Hyuk grabbed one of the barman's feet and started pulling. The villain thrashed, panic setting in as he screamed and struggled. Jin Hyuk, unfazed, calmly explained that he was simply helping him find the motivation to talk. The barman tried to act tough, forcing out a weak declaration that violence wouldn't make him talk. Jin Hyuk strongly disagreed. But before he could escalate things further, Lucia stepped in. With a look of pure exasperation, she told him to step aside and quit the barbaric, overcomplicated methods. Jin Hyuk huffed, but let her take over. Lucia calmly raised her hand, manifesting a mysterious power that shimmered ominously in her palm. She brought it close to the barman's face, and in an instant, his expression shifted. The sheer terror drained away, replaced by a strange sense of ease, though he remained just as hideous. A few moments of silence passed as the power seeped into his system. And then, out of nowhere, his face twisted into something deranged. His eyes darted wildly as he suddenly blurted out a question. Were they sent by an organization called Ultron? His voice cracked with paranoia, insisting that no matter how much trouble Ultron stirred up, it was already too late. Lucia tilted her head. That wasn't the reaction she expected. Sure, she meant to loosen his tongue, but she hadn't planned on making him a complete lunatic. Well, at least it worked. The barman kept rambling, his words spiraling further into madness. He sneered as he declared that Ultron was insignificant. His tyrant guild would wipe out every last one of their enemies. And just like that, the truth revealed itself. The tyrant guild. Jin Hyuk's eyes darkened. This situation was bigger than he initially thought. Now that the guild's name was on the table, he pressed forward, demanding to know what made them so confident that they could massacre their enemies. The barman, practically drooling at this point, let out a crazed chuckle. His answer was simple. They had Alone's elixir. Jin Hyuk frowned. That name meant nothing to him. What the hell was he talking about? A few minutes later, the police arrived to investigate the incident, but by then, Jin Hyuk and Lucia had already slipped away. What started as a simple bar brawl had unexpectedly led them to uncover a massive conspiracy, one that reached all the way to the top, with a major guild secretly pulling the strings. As they hurried through the dimly lit streets, Lucia explained the horrifying truth. Alone's elixir wasn't just some ordinary performance enhancer. It was a drug that doubled a user's stats, but at a horrific cost. To make it, countless young women were sacrificed. She had heard of dark practices before, but never in her wildest nightmares did she think that a guild from Earth would be capable of producing something so sinister. It was almost unfathomable. But this wasn't new to her. Back in her world, Alone's elixir had existed too. There, they called it the Queen's Tear, a name that carried a heavy, painful weight. One of her closest friends had been sacrificed for it when they were younger. Years later, after reaching platinum rank, Lucia had personally wiped out the organization responsible for the drug's production. No mercy, no negotiations, she had burned them to the ground. That explained why she had been so grim ever since they left the bar. The moment she heard the name Alone's elixir, she already knew what had to be done. Now the question was what next? The barman had already spilled that the elixir was almost complete. If they wanted to stop it, they needed to take down the Tyrant Guild before production was finalized. Meanwhile, back at the bar, long after the police had left the scene, a man dressed in all black stood in the shadows, reporting the incident to his superiors. His mask and glasses covered most of his face, but his sharp, calculating tone left no doubt about his efficiency. Based on his investigation, this wasn't an internal dispute. What was strange was that the perpetrators had only killed the barman and left. This wasn't a tactic used by any rival guilds or their usual enemies. Something didn't add up. His orders were clear. Find out who had interrupted their operation. And soon, the masked man was confident. Whoever the perpetrators were, they wouldn't stay hidden for long. But the Tyrant Guild wasn't the only one making moves. At the Titan Guild, the atmosphere was tense. Their top brass was currently overseas on business, but that didn't stop the gears from turning. The ever-efficient secretary, Lee Hyena, had just finished overseeing their operations in Hong Kong. The results had been excellent. If they kept this up, they could even consider recruiting 15% more guild members. By all accounts, the guild was thriving. But Seo Sengo, the Titan Guild's leader, wasn't feeling too great. He had just received news about Alone's elixir. As expected, even someone as competent as Lee Hyena had never heard of it before. The association had been working hard to keep its existence under wraps. Unfortunately, Hyena's return to Korea would have to wait, there was still guild business overseas. That meant Sango would have to handle things on his own. Wasting no time, he issued an urgent order to the entire guild. Effective immediately, Titan Guild was declaring full-scale war against the Tyrant Guild. The sudden declaration sent shockwaves through the guild. A move like this wasn't just risky, it was an outright gamble. Lee Hyena, ever the voice of reason, immediately asked for more details. Declaring war without consulting their executives? Without a strategy? It was reckless, even by Sango's standards. But he wasn't budging. He knew that failing to act now would only lead to greater chaos later. If the information he had received was correct, by the time the world found out about Alone's elixir, it would already be too late. Hyena, still skeptical, pressed for more information. What exactly had he learned that made him take such a drastic step? Declaring war on a guild as powerful as Tyrant wasn't something they could undo. Sango didn't answer right away. He knew the risks. He knew this decision would shake the entire guild. But he also knew they wouldn't be alone in this fight. Ultron Guild, and even the government itself, would be on their side once the truth came to light. Even so, war carried enormous risks. Hyena suggested they at least consult their executives first, make a plan, act cautiously. But Sango had already made up his mind. His thoughts had never been clearer, and he had no patience for drawn-out meetings and debates. One look at his expression told Hyena everything she needed to know. He wasn't going to change his mind. Sango was a cautious man by nature, but this time he was decisive. He understood Hyena's reservations. Acting blindly was never ideal. But right now, there was no time to hesitate. For now, he needed her to trust his call. They would keep the war declaration confidential within the guild while conducting hushed investigations. The official announcement of war could come later. As for the internal investigations, Sango already had a few people in mind, certain individuals he needed more information on. What had prompted this sudden shift in his stance? What had pushed him to act so suddenly? A single text from Jin Hyuk. A warning about Tyrant's plan to create a sinister drug, one fueled by human sacrifice. Lucia was comfortably lounging in Jin Hyuk's place, happily munching on sweets while pestering him about his plans. Honestly, she was just relieved to know that there were still some sane and reliable people in this world, like CEO Sango. If no one had stepped up to take down the Tyrant Guild, she would have handled it herself. And really, with how insanely inhumane the method for creating Alone's elixir was, it needed to be stopped. Jin Hyuk, on the other hand, had a slightly different concern. He glanced at the elf, who had been practically living in his pantry, and asked when she planned on going back to the dungeon. Her response? A hard no. Why would she return to some dull dungeon when she could join a raid against a villainous guild instead? She figured that if the Tyrant Guild was crazy enough to concoct something so sinister, then they definitely weren't your average hunters. Even Jin Hyuk had to admit, this wasn't something he could take on alone. At least, not yet. That's when Lucia officially threw in her support. She was all in on wiping out those scumbags together. Jin Hyuk appreciated the gesture, even though she didn't have to help. Then knock, knock, knock. Someone was at the door, calling out his name. Jin Hyuk wasn't expecting anyone, so this was an unplanned surprise. A delivery, maybe? Or something else? Perhaps it was the masked man, the one investigating what went down at the bar. That man had a magical compass, one that could track people through blood. Using the barman's blood, he had locked onto the traces left on Jin Hyuk from the bar fight. And this guy? He didn't need a car. He navigated the city effortlessly, leaping across rooftops like it was a casual stroll. His hunt led him straight to an apartment complex, where he finally came to a stop. Staring at the humble home in front of him, the masked man felt something odd. For a split second, the house almost seemed hazy. But he shook off the thought, probably just his imagination. More importantly, he recognized the address. This was the home of the hunter who took down the Leviathan a few days ago. That meant there could be a connection between the two incidents. Not that it mattered to him. His job was simple. Find a target, get answers. Without hesitation, he conjured a thick needle out of thin air, its sinister aura practically pulsing in the air. He was ready to persuade his target into answering a few questions. Meanwhile, Jin Hyuk casually walked to the door and asked who it was. As expected, the masked man responded with a classic excuse. He was here for a late delivery, due to an accident. Jin Hyuk wasn't foolish. A delivery showing up in the dead of night? Not a chance. On top of that, his house was shielded by a recognition suppression spell, making it practically impossible to locate. If someone had managed to bypass such a powerful enchantment and still had the nerve to show up pretending to be a delivery man. There was only one reason. They were up to something shady. Still, he opened the door, remaining on high alert. The moment he did, the masked man wasted no time, forcing his way inside with a sinister-looking needle in hand. As expected, the intruder had no intention of playing fair. But Jin Hyuk had already anticipated underhanded tactics, so when the needle came for him, he effortlessly caught the attacker's wrist. With a hint of amusement, he couldn't help but wonder if deliveries now came with poison darts as a complimentary bonus. The masked man, who had planned a perfect sneak attack, found himself on the receiving end of the surprise instead. Before he could regain control, Lucia intervened, firing an arrow while urging Jin Hyuk to step aside. The shot was devastating. At such close range, dodging was impossible. The arrow struck with immense force, sending the intruder hurtling through the second-floor window. As he crashed outside, blood poured from the deep wound, the arrow burying itself further into his body. But Lucia wasn't taking any chances. Without hesitation, she prepared another shot, signaling to Jin Hyuk that she intended to finish the job. Jin Hyuk, however, dismissed the idea, insisting that he would handle it himself. He reasoned that the masked man had likely come for him due to the incident at the bar. Lucia, unconvinced, pointed out that this opponent was no ordinary assassin. After all, he had survived a direct hit from one of her arrows. Meanwhile, outside, the masked man struggled to remove the embedded arrow, his hands trembling from the blood loss. As he finally pulled it free, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of dread. The sheer force behind that single attack had left him in critical condition. He shuddered, realizing that the woman inside wasn't someone to be taken lightly. Despite his injuries, his survival instincts screamed at him to escape while he still could. By the time Jin Hyuk moved to pursue, the intruder was already making a clumsy but determined getaway, leaping across neighboring rooftops despite his wounded state. Lucia glanced at Jin Hyuk, silently asking if he wanted to give chase. But he found the idea far too troublesome. The masked man would come for him again eventually. There was no need to rush. For now, something else caught his attention. The man's karma value was over 900, the kind of number that only belonged to seasoned killers, those who took lives as if it meant nothing. A real villain. Jin Hyuk couldn't deny it. This was going to be interesting. The next day arrived, and Jin Hyuk and Lucia found themselves seated inside a guild car, being escorted to the mountains. Their driver eventually pulled over, gesturing toward a remote investigation site ahead. This wasn't just any random mission. They had been brought here under guild leader Sango's personal orders. But of course, that didn't change the fact that plenty of people within the Titan Guild weren't exactly thrilled about Jin Hyuk's presence. As they stepped out, Jin Hyuk scanned the gathered troops at the base of the site. His quick assessment told him that at least half of them were A-rank hunters or higher, a team of pure elites. And leading them? None other than that guy. The same irritating bastard who had once tried to pick a fight with him. Executive Han Yong-suk, looking all-important, had apparently been put in charge of the operation. From the moment Jin Hyuk saw him, an undeniable sense of irritation bubbled up. This mission was definitely going to be a headache. The executive wasted no time formally introducing himself, and much to Jin Hyuk's surprise, he even brought up their last encounter during the airstrike. What was even more unexpected was the shift in his attitude. Today, he appeared oddly amicable, almost polite. Jin Hyuk couldn't help but notice the drastic difference in personality and found it very suspicious. Sure enough, Yong-suk cleared his throat awkwardly and followed up with an apology, claiming he had just been overly enthusiastic in his efforts for the guild last time. He hoped they could put the past behind them, so it wouldn't affect today's mission. Jin Hyuk wasn't exactly convinced, but he let it slide for now. Moments later, the executive turned his attention to Lucia, clearly taken aback by her presence. He inquired about who she was, clearly expecting some kind of explanation. Jin Hyuk casually introduced her as a skilled colleague who wouldn't be a hindrance. There was no mention of any extra personnel in the mission briefing, so Yong-suk seemed visibly rattled. He looked like he wanted to protest, but before he could, the recon team they had sent ahead returned with their report. With a curt nod, Yong-suk excused himself to hear what his scouts had to say. Of course, Jin Hyuk wasn't fooled by the executive's little display. Apology or not, the guy was still looking down on him and Lucia, probably assuming they were just a couple of C-rank nobodies. It didn't matter how strong they actually were. This four-eyed bastard had his own agenda, and his condescending attitude hadn't changed one bit. Lucia had already picked up on the executive's fake politeness. She quietly checked with Jin Hyuk, wondering if they were really going to let this guy take the lead. Jin Hyuk assured her that it wasn't worth worrying about. They'd be fine. Besides, there was something more interesting to deal with. Someone had been tailing them since earlier. It wasn't even subtle. Both Jin Hyuk and Lucia had noticed their not-so-covert pursuer a long time ago. But instead of confronting them, Jin Hyuk had decided to let it be. There was no rush. Whoever it was, they might be useful later. Before the raid began, Jin Hyuk handed Lucia a bright magical crystal, a small but invaluable communication item. With this, they could stay in contact within a 10-kilometer range. They would need it later, so it was best to keep it close. Meanwhile, Young-suk returned with a confirmation of the initial reports. The evidence was undeniable. The Tyrant Guild was heavily involved in human trafficking. But rather than just sharing intel, Young-suk had another request. After investigating the area, the recon team discovered a strong magical barrier surrounding the building. The problem? Only one person could break through it without setting off every alarm in the vicinity. And according to Young-suk, that person was none other than Jin Hyuk. The young man immediately called him out. This wasn't a request. It was a suicide mission. Walking straight into enemy territory alone, that was as good as signing a death warrant. But Young-suk, ever the impartial team leader, kept a straight face. He even had the audacity to throw in some sarcasm, claiming that only the man who took down the Leviathan could possibly pull off such a stealth mission. And to make it sound even more reasonable, he pointed out that Jin Hyuk would probably have an easier time going in alone rather than working with Titan Guild members he had never teamed up with before. Of course, that was just another way of saying we're dumping all the risks on you. Good luck. It was obvious that they thought they were outsmarting him, neatly shifting the burden onto his shoulders. But what they didn't realize was that this was exactly the kind of situation Jin Hyuk had been hoping for. With that, he joined a select team of Titan Guild hunters and moved toward the part of the barrier where they could create an entry point. The plan was straightforward. The magic team would generate a small breach, just big enough for Jin Hyuk to slip through. The problem? These so-called experts could only hold the breach open for a few seconds, which meant he had to move at full speed. They reached the eastern side of the facility and wasted no time. The magic team got to work, struggling to maintain even the slightest gap in the barrier. Jin Hyuk didn't hesitate. He knew he was being played, deliberately funneled into enemy territory like a disposable pawn. But strangely enough, he didn't mind. After all, his real interest wasn't in the mission itself. He just wanted to see exactly what the Tyrant Guild was hiding in these mountains. The moment the breach was established, Jin Hyuk wasted no time and dashed inside the barrier, his eyes gleaming with excitement as he scanned the compound. But the moment he stopped and summoned his trusty bat, he noticed something strange. The base looked completely different from the outside. The protective barrier must have been layered with a distortion effect, disguising its true appearance. That wasn't his concern for now. First things first, he needed to locate the entrance to this massive base camp. However, after several minutes of wandering, something fell off. There were way fewer guards than he had anticipated. The place was supposed to be a high-security facility, yet it felt eerily underprotected. Eventually, he spotted a lone guard stationed near the barrier, seemingly guarding an entrance. That was the first real lead he had. After all, if someone was standing guard, there had to be something worth protecting behind them. Wasting no time, Jin Hyuk took to the air and raised his bat, pouring his monstrous strength into the swing. The plan was simple: knock the guy out, capture him, and get some much-needed answers. But just as his bat made contact, something unexpected happened. Instead of a satisfying impact, the guard simply vanished, dissolving into thin air like smoke. An illusion. Jin Hyuk stood there for a moment, blinking at the empty space where the guard had been. Well, that was disappointing. So much for interrogating someone. Now, it was entirely up to him to figure out how to get inside. Much to his surprise, the supposedly high-security facility had automatic doors. Like a freaking supermarket. The lack of proper defenses was almost laughable. No biometric scanners, no heavy-duty locks, not even a single CCTV camera in sight. It was as if the people running this place were so confident that the women they abducted had zero chance of escaping that they didn't bother with real security. Still, Jin Hyuk wasn't about to let his guard down. Just to be safe, he pulled out an insurance policy. From his inventory, he retrieved an EMP generator, a handy little device crafted from the materials of electric-type monsters, and casually dropped it onto the floor. With this, any communications or security systems in the area would be fried. This was precisely why he had left a magic communication crystal with Lucia beforehand, so they wouldn't lose contact despite the blackout. As the EMP took effect and the compound was officially cut off from the grid, Jin Hyuk took a deep breath. Now, it was time to get started on the real mission. From a distance, the masked man remained fixated on Jin Hyuk, silently observing his every move. The pieces were starting to come together. Jin Hyuk's connection to the bar incident and the Titan Guild was becoming clearer. But just like everyone else, the masked man had his own hidden motives, and for some reason, Jin Hyuk was a key factor in ensuring everything played out smoothly. Meanwhile, inside the facility, the consequences of Jin Hyuk's actions were already rippling through. The EMP he had set off didn't just disrupt security, it also ruined someone's gaming session. One of the idle guards had been engrossed in his phone, only to watch in frustration as his screen went black. Cursing the countryside's terrible signal, he grumbled about how his precious gaming time always seemed to get interrupted. Unfortunately for him, that would be the least of his worries. Before the realization even sank in, something red came hurtling toward him. A bat. Jin Hyuk didn't even bother swinging it. He had thrown it instead. The blunt tip slammed mercilessly into the side of the man's face, and before he could react, the bat had already pierced through. The guard crumpled to the ground, out cold. Without missing a beat, Jin Hyuk activated auto-recovery, summoning his weapon back into his grip. Finally, an opponent made of flesh and blood. The impact sent blood splattering against the nearby wall as the body hit the smooth concrete floor with a dull thud. And yet, this wasn't some trained hunter or elite fighter. He was just an ordinary man. An ordinary man, with a karma value of 800. That number spoke volumes. If even a regular person here had committed enough atrocities to rack up such a score, then this place wasn't just corrupt, it was overflowing with inhuman scum. That meant Jin Hyuk could go all out. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Every single person involved in this twisted operation deserved nothing less than absolute annihilation. Pushing forward, he entered the locked gate and found himself in a long, dimly lit hallway lined with prison doors. The atmosphere was suffocating, thick with the stench of neglect. This had to be where they kept the abducted women. A quick glance into the cells confirmed his suspicions. The conditions were beyond inhumane. Each prisoner was shackled like a caged animal, stripped of dignity, awaiting their fate. They weren't just captives, they were resources for that accursed elixir. But before Jin Hyuk could process his next move, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Someone was calling out, demanding to know who he was. Unlike the other cells, one held a man. Jin Hyuk's eyes narrowed as recognition set in. The prisoner wasn't just anyone. He was wearing the uniform of the Tyrant Guild. Despite his own predicament, the captive wasted no time warning Jin Hyuk to get out while he still could. Whatever was happening inside this facility, it had already driven everyone to the brink of insanity. Staying any longer was a death sentence. Meanwhile, outside, the so-called team leader was busy checking his watch, tracking the progress of Jin Hyuk's infiltration. It had been a while since the young man entered, and things were still eerily quiet. Maybe it was time to make a move. Young-suk didn't hesitate. With a single order, his men were set into motion, advancing toward the facility in a synchronized rush. Dressed in black jackets, the Titans swarmed forward like a mass of eager flies, ready to strike at the first sign of trouble. But amidst the movement, one person remained completely still. Lucia. She stood there, utterly unfazed by the rush of activity. Young-suk threw her a glance, still unable to figure out what her deal was. Unlike the rest of them, she didn't seem the least bit concerned. Finally, as the four-eyed bastard joined his men outside, leaving Jin Hyuk to do all the work inside, Lucia mulled over her own role in all this. Before the mission had begun, Jin Hyuk had been clear. He would handle everything inside the building alone. That was his fight. Her job was different. She was here to keep an eye on the Titans. They still had no idea what Hang Young-suk might try to pull, and that meant she had to stay vigilant. Jin Hyuk had warned her against getting too involved, but playing it safe had never been her style. And she wasn't about to start now. Back inside the facility, the prisoner finally introduced himself as Young Dae-yoon. Jin Hyuk, sizing him up, wasted no time in questioning how a Tyrant Guild member had ended up in such a pitiful state. Dae-yoon didn't hesitate to admit the truth. He had been locked up for attempting to kill Alron himself. Right now, the only reason they were keeping him alive was for his expertise in illusion magic. That distortion effect on the protective barrier, the fake guard, Yeah, all his work. Jin Hyuk found himself intrigued. Why would someone betray their own guild and sabotage its research? The answer was simple. Dae-yoon just couldn't stomach the cruelty anymore. Watching his colleagues throw women to monsters as bait had pushed him to his limit. Eventually, he snapped, tried to take Auron down once and for all, and got caught. For once, Jin Hyuk was pleasantly surprised. A tyrant guild member with a conscience? That was a rare sight. Even the man's karma value was surprisingly low, just 62. Without hesitation, Jin Hyuk extended an offer. If Dae-yoon wanted to tear down this wretched facility, they might as well work together. Meanwhile, in the control room, the grunt assigned to monitor security was having a peaceful little nap in his chair. It wasn't the first time, and it probably wouldn't be the last. He always got sleepy at this hour, and really, it wasn't a big deal. Nothing ever happened here. At least, that's what he thought. The moment he woke up, something was off. Instead of the usual live feeds of the entire facility, the screens in front of him were pitch black. He blinked, looked around in confusion, and tried to make sense of the situation. No luck. Panic set in as he scrambled to reboot the system, only to realize the real problem. The power source had been fried. Thanks to Jin Hyuk's EMP, every electronic device, including smartphones, was out of commission. The entire system was dead, and he had slept through the whole disaster. If there was an award for Employee of the Month, he was definitely not getting it. Just outside the command center, a few tyrant guild members were passing the time with a card game, having the time of their lives. That was until their relaxed evening was rudely interrupted by the control room guy screaming about an emergency. Annoyed, the players turned to him, more irritated about their game being cut short than anything else. But the moment they heard what had actually happened, their frustration turned into alarm. The entire security system was down. Every single woman locked in the cells was missing. And worst of all, they had an intruder. The facility had been plunged into absolute chaos. With no time to waste, the team leaders quickly split their forces. One group headed straight for the Auron production room, while the other focused on tracking down the intruder and the missing captives. And as for the genius who had let this all happen, the control room grunt was now stuck with one job: find a way to contact headquarters, no matter what. Every single prison cell had been unlocked, freeing the abducted women. With their lives hanging by a thread, they wasted no time, rushing toward the nearest exit. Leading the way was Dae-yoon, who knew the facility's layout like the back of his hand. He navigated the group through the most optimal path, getting them dangerously close to freedom, only for trouble to arrive right on cue. The tyrant boys had caught onto their escape. As soon as they spotted the fleeing women, they flooded into the area like a pack of rabid dogs. The first one to step in immediately recognized Dae-yoon, who was still directing the captives to safety. Without hesitation, he held his ground, ensuring the women could get through while he stayed behind to buy them more time. One of the tyrant boys got ahead of himself, charging in alone with the bold claim that he would finish Dae-yoon once and for all. But the moment his punch landed, reality shifted, a cruel reminder of Dae-yoon's specialty: illusion. The attacker seethed with rage, realizing he had fallen for such a simple trick. Meanwhile, while Team 2 was struggling to chase down Dae-yoon and the women, Team 1 was having a far worse time elsewhere. Armed with little more than knives, they found themselves face-to-face with someone much more dangerous: Jin Hyuk. And they had brought knives to a baseball bat fight. Jin Hyuk made quick work of them. His superior technique and footwork turned their pathetic attempts at combat into an absolute joke. With each swing, he sent a tyrant boy crumpling to the ground. One clean hit per target, as if he were just knocking down bowling pins. By the time the last one hit the floor, Jin Hyuk hadn't even broken a sweat. Judging by how desperately they had been guarding the front gate, there was only one conclusion: Alone had to be inside. Without wasting another second, Jin Hyuk gained access to the room and cautiously stepped in. The sight that greeted him was even more vile than he had imagined. The tyrant scum hadn't just been making the inhumane drug, they had built an entire underground lab to mass produce it. Human-sized test tubes filled the space, each one containing a woman the guild had abducted for their twisted experiments. The sheer scale of their operation was enough to make his stomach turn. But the worst part of all, at the center of the lab, encased in protective glass, was the source of this nightmare. The monster responsible for all this grief and suffering. Auron. Jin Hyuk tightened his grip on his bat. The creature showed no reaction to his presence, completely still. It was entirely possible that it was asleep. That was fine. It just made things easier. With a smirk tugging at his lips, he called forth the lightning dwelling inside his weapon, electricity crackling through the air. Stepping into his batting stance, he prepared to take the ultimate swing. If everything went according to plan, he would end this tonight. Suddenly, without warning, tentacles burst from the tubes, lashing out at Jin Hyuk with terrifying speed. Glass shattered all around as Alron, a monstrous creature, emerged from the wreckage, roaring in fury. Jin Hyuk reacted instantly, activating his hardened skin ability and dodging as the tentacles struck violently. Wasting no time, he pushed forward, closing the gap between them. But before he could land a hit, one of the writhing limbs managed to catch him, sending him flying across the room. Groaning, he forced himself upright, using his bat to steady himself. His mind raced. What was that power? Even with his armor and hardened skin, the attack had nearly pierced through. Shaking off the pain, he readied himself for another round. Charging in once more, he used his bat to deflect the flailing tentacles, maneuvering swiftly around the battlefield. With a sharp pivot, he ran up the wall, using the momentum to launch himself through the air. His strike was precise, the bat stabbing straight into Auron's chest. Suddenly, electricity crackled around him as he channeled his skill, sending a surge of lightning through the monster's body. Auron convulsed violently, its entire form twisting in agony before collapsing to the ground in a smoldering heap. Breathing heavily, Jin Hyuk scanned the aftermath. Amidst the wreckage, something caught his eye, an object lying near the monster's corpse. He approached cautiously, attempting to appraise it, but the result came up blank. Based on its shape and energy, he could only assume it was a magic stone. Without hesitation, he stashed it away and pulled out his communication device. Contacting Lucia, he asked if the girls had moved safely. She confirmed that they were fine, but quickly added something concerning. One of the Tyrant Guild members was with them. Jin Hyuk explained that the man had betrayed his own guild and had been helping them. He believed the guy was sincere. Lucia then inquired about Auron, to which Jin Hyuk casually assured her that it had been taken care of. Plus, he'd even scored a magic stone in the process. Just as he was about to leave, Lucia updated him on the battlefield. The others were still fighting against Titan Guild members, but something was wrong. Suddenly, the enemies had grown significantly stronger, fighting like they had gone completely berserk. Jin Hyuk's expression darkened. If the Titan Guild lost here, it would cause even bigger problems. He instructed Lucia to help them out. She acknowledged the request, her bow already charging with energy, before ending the call with a teasing remark about how he owed her a ridiculous amount of sweets for this. Jin Hyuk chuckled lightly, stepping over the remains of the battle. But just as he moved forward, his expression sharpened. He wasn't alone. Without turning, he called out to the unseen presence, his voice calm but firm. He knew someone was there. A man emerged from the shadows, looking genuinely surprised that he had been sensed. Jin Hyuk narrowed his eyes. There was no need for small talk. What was the real objective here? Was it the Auron stone? Or was it him? The man smirked, admitting that he had originally come for the stone. But after seeing Jin Hyuk in action, he had changed his mind. Jin Hyuk's gaze darkened. That was a mistake. Without warning, he charged forward, bat raised for another fight. The assassin lunged, aiming a deadly stab with his knife, but Jin Hyuk slipped past the attack with ease. Countering instantly, he struck with his hand, only for the assassin to block, clearly taken aback by Jin Hyuk's speed. For a brief moment, the assassin reeled. Too fast. Far too fast for a C-rank hunter. That's when it clicked. This wasn't the first time Jin Hyuk had reacted unnaturally fast. Even back at the bar, catching that poison dart wasn't just luck. Jin Hyuk suddenly hurled his bat, but the assassin sidestepped, watching as it embedded itself deep into the wall. Before he could react further, Jin Hyuk leaped into the air, calling his bat back to his hand like a magnetized weapon. The assassin barely had time to register what was happening before the bat came swinging toward him. Dodging at the last second, the assassin managed to land a counterattack, striking Jin Hyuk's back, but the hit was completely nullified by his armor. Frustrated, the assassin adjusted his strategy, aiming directly for Jin Hyuk's neck, but Jin Hyuk deflected him with a forceful shove. Without wasting a second, Jin Hyuk charged his bat with raw electricity, forming a concentrated lightning ball before hurling it straight at the assassin. The man barely managed to conjure a defensive shield, struggling to withstand the sheer force of the attack. Smoke filled the air as the battlefield crackled with energy. Through the lingering smoke, Jin Hyuk surged forward, his grip tightening around the bat. With deadly precision, He struck the assassin, the weapon crackling with lightning as the force of the impact coursed through his enemy's body. One final blow ended the fight. The assassin collapsed, lifeless. Outside, chaos reigned. The Titan Guild members worked swiftly, burning the bodies of the fallen Tyrant Guild hunters to erase all traces of the battle. Amidst it all, Young-suk, now tending to his wounds, reflected on how close they had come to death. If that elf hadn't stepped in, they would have been wiped out. Her arrows, sharp, swift, and relentless, had matched the caliber of an S-rank hunter, a terrifying thought in itself. As the cleanup continued, a hunter approached with an update. All the wounded had been transported to the hospital, and every piece of evidence had been erased. Young-suk gave a curt nod. Good. With the Tyrant Guild taken care of, it was time to move forward with the welcoming ceremony. But just then, an unexpected arrival disrupted the moment. Dae-yoon, the Tyrant Guild member who had betrayed them, rushed in, his expression tense. There was no need for words. His face alone carried bad news. And sure enough, his warning was dire. The Tyrant Guild leader, along with their main forces, was already on the way. A chilling realization settled in as a white-haired man among them stiffened. The guild leader, Cho Won-cheol, was coming. A brief moment of silence followed before the weight of those words sank in. There was no chance of winning against someone like him. Before they could fully process the first report, another followed, confirming that the Tyrant Guild hunters were approaching fast. Time was running out. Quickly assessing the situation, Young-suk made the only logical decision: abort the operation. A retreat was their best option now. Turning to Dae-yoon, he asked if the man would be coming with them. But hesitation flickered in Dae-yoon's eyes before he shook his head. Leaving now would make his defection far too obvious. He would stay behind and submit a false report instead. Young-suk studied him for a moment before offering a nod of understanding. That was fine, but one thing was certain: an all-out war between the guilds had to be avoided for now. Before departing, he issued one final order: pin everything on Hunter Kong Jin-hyuk. The informant remained silent, weighing the implications of that command. Meanwhile, the Titan Guild made their retreat. As they ran, one of the hunters voiced his skepticism, questioning whether Young-suk's trust in Dae-yoon was warranted. But Young-suk barely spared him a glance. It didn't matter. They just needed time, because sooner or later, full-scale war was inevitable. Dae-yoon stood in place, his posture calm yet alert. Moments later, Lucia approached, her gaze sharp as she questioned whether he was the person Jin-hyuk had mentioned. Without wasting time, she told him to let Leighton go. Jin-hyuk was waiting inside. The elf, ever composed, asked if the situation had been handled. Dae-yoon simply nodded, stating that he had taken care of the man who had followed them. With that out of the way, he turned to Jin-hyuk, seeking an update on their current predicament. Jin-hyuk wasted no time in explaining. Auron was dead, but there was still a loose end to deal with. He suggested pinning everything on the attacker, making it look like he had died in battle against Auron. The elf hesitated for a moment, questioning if Jin-hyuk truly intended to frame the man for everything. Jin-hyuk, unbothered, told him to check the diary. Inside were the names of all the victims of recent serial murders. Their attacker wasn't just some random thug. He was the great guild killer, the one who had been shaking the entire public by targeting major guilds. If they made him the scapegoat, no one would suspect a thing. Without hesitation, Jin-hyuk turned to Dae-yoon, asking if he could handle it. The elf, still processing the plan, admitted that he didn't fully understand Jin-hyuk's methods, but if he was saying there wouldn't be problems later, then that was enough. He assured them that he would take care of the rest and urged them to leave. After all, the Tyrant Guild was already on its way. They had roughly 2 hours before their arrival. Fortunately, the advance party had been nothing more than an illusion he had created. Before parting ways, the elf expressed his gratitude, thanking Jin-hyuk for saving him and the others. Jin-hyuk, as usual, dismissed it casually. There was no need for thanks, just a simple request to contact him once everything was over. As he walked away, Jin-hyuk couldn't help but smirk at the thought of what was about to unfold. The Tyrant Guild had suffered a massive blow, and once the other guilds caught wind of it, they wouldn't just sit back and watch. The guild's downfall was inevitable, and honestly, he was looking forward to seeing it crumble. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Titan Guild's master, Seo Sango, and his secretary, deep in discussion over the latest developments. The situation had escalated beyond expectations, and it was no longer just a problem for the Titan Guild. It affected the entire guild system. Sango decided that the best course of action was to share the information anonymously. His secretary, however, pointed out that doing so would benefit other guilds, potentially putting Titan at a disadvantage. But the guild master wasn't concerned about that. If word got out that Titan Guild was directly involved, the resulting guild war would be catastrophic. It was better to resolve the situation quietly than to waste time scheming for personal gain. With that, the secretary followed orders and anonymously leaked the information. Not long after, the news exploded with reports about the Tyrant Guild's criminal activities. People everywhere were talking about it, and arrests within the guild were already being made. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the Tyrant Guild refused to submit to the investigation. One person who wasn't taking it well was Young Suk. Enraged, he cursed his guild master, blaming him for ruining everything. He wasted no time dialing his superior, demanding to know why they had given away the information anonymously. After all, they had done all the work, yet now those Ultron bastards were being hailed as heroes. The guild master remained unfazed, explaining that if they had exposed themselves, the Tyrant Guild would have crushed them before the other guilds had time to react. But Young Suk wasn't satisfied. He argued that if his plan to recruit an S-rank hunter succeeded, the Tyrant Guild wouldn't stand chance. His superior, however, wasn't convinced. He questioned whether Young Suk could truly guarantee victory against the Tyrant Guild's master and, more importantly, what would happen to the civilians caught in the crossfire. Young Suk dismissed the concern, calling it a minor loss compared to the power they would gain by absorbing the Tyrant Guild's strength. That was the last straw. The guild master, voice filled with frustration, demanded to know what the point of being a hunter was if they couldn't even protect civilians. Young Suk's so-called loyalty to the guild was nothing more than selfish ambition, and he wasn't fooling anyone. Before Young Suk could argue further, the call was cut off. Furious, he slammed his fist into his monitor, seething with resentment. As long as his current guild master remained in power, the Titan Guild would never move forward. But he had no intention of sitting around and accepting that. Without hesitation, he made another call. The voice on the other end was uninterested, already knowing what this was about. Another recruitment attempt? He wasn't interested, unless, of course, it was for the position of guildmaster. This time, Young Suk didn't hesitate. He would make it happen. He would give him the position. And with that, the next move was set into motion. The scene shifts to Jin Hyuk, who had been set up for a secret meeting. But instead of choosing a discreet, low-profile location like a normal person, he went ahead and picked the busiest damn cafe right in the middle of the market. If someone wanted him to be subtle, well, they were shit out of luck. As he stepped inside, the place was alive with chatter, the rich scent of coffee filling the air. A mix of people surrounded him, and, of course, a good number of them were drop-dead, gorgeous women. Not a bad setting for whatever nonsense was about to unfold. Before he could even fully take in the scene, a voice called out to him. Dae-yoon, the same old Tyrant Guild buddy he'd been dealing with. Jin Hyuk acknowledged him with a nod, noting the barely concealed tension on the man's face. Judging by that expression, shit was either going very well or about to go downhill real fast. Dae-yoon, casually nursing a cup of coffee, assured him that, for now, everything was under control. But Jin Hyuk wasn't stupid. There was always a but lurking around the corner. Without wasting time, he asked if the web of lies they'd spun had held up. At first, it seemed like it had. The plan was running smoothly, but as expected, there was a goddamn problem. The Tyrant Guild had decided to form a pursuit team. Jin Hyuk barely reacted. He didn't frown, didn't flinch. Hell, he didn't even look remotely concerned. Instead, with all the urgency of a man debating whether to add more sugar to his coffee, he picked up his mug, took a slow sip, and leaned back into his seat. The guild was already hanging on by a thread, yet somehow they still found the resources to hunt someone down. He almost found it funny. Almost. Dae-yoon, however, had an explanation. The guild's higher-ups weren't buying the story. To them, the body had been discovered too quickly, and the news had spread too damn fast. That could only mean one thing. There had to be another culprit. Someone else is pulling the strings. Jin Hyuk, ever the picture of indifference, simply acknowledged that no concrete evidence had surfaced. As long as his identity remained hidden, there was nothing to worry about. Even so, playing it safe was never a bad idea. If lying low for a while ensured that the Tyrant Guild crumbled on its own, then maybe it was worth considering. Dae-yoon agreed. Then, without warning, he pulled out a phone and handed it over. A simple gesture, but one that carried weight. On that device was everything Jin Hyuk needed to know about the pursuit team. Jin-hyuk took the iPhone 11, a relic by modern standards, but still functional, and began scrolling through the information. Dae-yoon, watching him, hesitated for a moment before asking if he was really planning to go through the intel right here, right now. Jin-hyuk, of course, didn't give a shit. Nothing in this place mattered. No one was watching them. In fact, no one was real. Because the entire cafe, the chattering crowd, the ridiculously beautiful women, none of it fucking existed. It was all an illusion. Dae-yoon's reaction was immediate. He was surprised that Jin-hyuk had seen through it from the very start. And as realization dawned, Jin-hyuk simply smirked, as if the whole thing was nothing more than a mildly amusing joke. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that actually mattered was who the hell thought they could chase him down. Jin-hyuk settled into his seat, making himself comfortable as Dae-yoon laid out the details. The pursuit team consisted of 2 people, an archer and a mage, both masters of disguise and concealment magic. These bastards could very well approach him in the form of someone he knew. Jin-hyuk barely reacted. His face screamed boredom. That was it. That was all they had on him. Dae-yoon, noticing the lack of interest, reached into his pocket. For a moment, it looked like he was about to pull out a coin, but no, just kidding. What he actually pulled out was something far more annoying. A monster counter. Jin-hyuk's eyes narrowed slightly. He recognized the device. The very same type Titan Guild had given him. The one he had used when taking down Leviathan. But this one was smaller, sleeker, different. He picked it up, examining the new design, and shot a questioning glance at Dae-yoon. The explanation followed. After the Allron incident, the association had developed an advanced version of the device. Its purpose? To monitor hunters. Jin-hyuk took a closer look, turning the counter in his hand. His mind was already working through the kind of problems this thing was about to cause. And then Dae-yoon dropped the real kicker. Starting immediately, all hunters, beginning with his guild, were now required to wear one. This wasn't just some tracking tool anymore. It was a goddamn leash. Every hunter would now be under the association's watchful eye. That meant one thing for Jin-hyuk: trouble. With this device, even hunting in his private dungeon could become a problem. Without a hint of hesitation, he calmly handed the counter back to Dae-yoon. Nope, not dealing with that bullshit. Dae-yoon, however, wasn't done warning him. If Jin-hyuk planned on using the Allron pill, he needed to do it now, before the monitoring system was fully established. There was no room for error. If Jin-hyuk took the pill after the system was in place, his sudden spike in power would immediately attract attention. And if that happened, even the damn Tyrant Guild would start suspecting him. Dae-yoon was practically urging him at this point. Make a decision, and make it fast. Later, as Jin-hyuk wandered through the streets, his mind was buzzing with thoughts of the surveillance system. It was clear now. He needed to get stronger. Fast. And there was only one solution. The dungeon. Right now, as Jin-hyuk stepped into the dungeon, he was immediately met with the furious glare of the old dwarf. The moment their eyes met, the dwarf let out an exasperated curse and exploded in anger, ranting about how he had sent Jin-hyuk to fetch some ore, yet the damn brat had vanished without a trace, only to stroll back in after an entire week. Jin-hyuk hurried to apologize, but that only seemed to make things worse. The old craftsman had assumed he was dead in some godforsaken corner of the dungeon, and now here he was, acting like nothing had happened. Trying to defuse the situation, Jin-hyuk urged him to calm down, saying he had something important to show. Without waiting for a response, he pulled out the black-red material he had obtained after defeating Allron. The moment the dwarf's eyes landed on it, his face twisted in pure outrage. His anger boiled over as he demanded if Jin-hyuk had even a single functioning brain cell to realize what kind of shit he had just brought into the workshop. Not waiting for an answer, he spat out that the core was cursed, filled with countless grudges, and that dwarves, being highly vulnerable to curses, didn't even dare to look at such things unless they had a death wish. That's when it finally hit Jin-hyuk. Before coming here, Lucia had told him she had some urgent work and practically shoved him ahead. Now it all made sense. That cunning little devil had set him up. Meanwhile, the dwarf was still going off, calling the core a worthless piece of junk and ordering him to get rid of it immediately before it did something nasty. Jin-hyuk, feeling a little guilty now, apologized again, but the old dwarf just let out a long-suffering sigh and muttered that being an idiot wasn't a crime. Shaking his head, he grumbled that he'd take care of this mess for now. That's when it clicked for Jin-hyuk. Dwarves were prideful bastards. When it came to their pride, they could pull off the impossible just to prove a point. As the old dwarf turned to leave, Jin-hyuk smirked and, in a deliberately mocking tone, muttered that if even the great boss couldn't handle it, then there was no other choice. Lucia had been damn right all along. She even said it would be too much for him. The words landed perfectly. The dwarf froze, his face twisting as if someone had just stomped on his pride. His voice came out sharp as he demanded to know exactly what that elf brat had said about him. And just like that, the scene shifted. Once again, Jinhyuk found himself standing on the same cliff, staring down at the place below, the Temple of a Dragon. The old dwarf had taken the bait, fully accepting the challenge. He had shoved a key into Jinhyuk's hands, instructing him to open the temple and purify the curse. Only then, he declared, would he forge something even better than that pathetic bat Jinhyuk was using. Lucia, of course, had plenty to say about this. She gave Jinhyuk an incredulous look and muttered that he was completely insane for using her name to provoke the dwarf. Jinhyuk just shrugged, reminding her that she was the one who abandoned him first. Without missing a beat, he held up the key and asked if this thing could really open the temple doors. For the first time, Lucia's expression turned serious. She confirmed that it could, but then asked if he had any idea what kind of place he was about to step into. Jinhyuk, still unfazed, tilted his head and asked what she meant. Wasn't it just some temple? Lucia let out a sigh, clearly frustrated by his lack of concern. It wasn't just a peaceful old ruin. It was far more dangerous than any dungeon he had faced so far. And if he went in now, without preparation, he'd be dead before he could even satisfy her with his damn chocolates. She made it clear she couldn't afford to let his stupid ass get killed. With that, she turned on her heel and ordered him to move. They were going home, right now. Jinhyuk groaned, protesting that after coming all this way, they were just going to turn back. But Lucia wasn't budging. This dungeon was too dangerous, and they had no choice. They would return later, properly prepared. Still annoyed, Jinhyuk muttered if they were really going to go through all this again. Lucia, already taking a leaping stance, just smirked and told him to hurry up. If he was late, she'd eat everything at his place. Left with no other option, Jinhyuk let out a sigh and followed after her. Back at Jinhyuk's home, he lay sprawled on the floor, completely drained. As he stared at the ceiling, he couldn't help but wonder just how absurdly fast Lucia was. His thoughts drifted back to the so-called preparations she had mentioned earlier. Potions? Scrolls? That was all he could think of. Maybe he should just ask her directly. But then a realization hit him. Where the hell was Lucia? His eyes widened, and in an instant, he bolted toward the kitchen. What he saw made his blood pressure spike. Lucia was there, happily stuffing her face, casually munching down on what was, oh hell no, a whole month's worth of food. The sight of her feasting away like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet made his eye twitch. Calling her shameless was the only logical reaction, but she didn't seem the least bit bothered. Before he could yell at her properly, his phone buzzed. Seeing the caller ID, his expression turned serious. It was Lee Hyena from the Titan Guild. The moment he answered, her shaky voice came through, frantic and desperate. She was pleading for his help, her words tumbling over each other as she said that if he didn't come, the guild master would be killed. Jinhyuk didn't waste a second. Without hesitation, he told her he was on his way and demanded the location. As dusk settled, the dimly lit room painted a grim picture. Bloodied clothes strewn across the table, a first aid kit lying open, and C.O. Sango slumped his chair, his body covered in fresh bandages. His secretary, Lee Hyena, worked frantically, her hands trembling as she patched him up. Tears welled in her eyes as she begged him to hold on, sobbing that Kong Jinhyuk was on his way. But the pain was unbearable. Sango coughed violently, a fresh trickle of blood escaping his lips, making Hyena's chest tighten in helplessness. Seeing her boss in such a wretched state was more than she could bear. Sango, despite his pain, forced a weak smile and assured her that he would be fine, telling her not to cry. But she wasn't stupid. She knew he was lying through his teeth. His condition was worse than he wanted to admit. Just then, the doorbell rang. Hyena flinched, her heart skipping a beat, but when she checked the security camera, relief flooded through her. It was Jinhyuk. As soon as he stepped inside, Jinhyuk wasted no time. He opened his inventory, retrieving a potion bottle, and without hesitation, moved towards Sango. The injured man let out a weak chuckle, barely managing to thank him for his kindness. But Jinhyuk simply told him to brace himself. The potion would sting like hell. Without further delay, he poured the liquid over Sango's wounds. The moment it touched his skin, a sharp, Burning pain tore through his body, making him writhe in agony. But soon, the worst had passed, and the healing effects began to take hold. Once Sango was stable, Jin Hyuk's expression darkened. His voice was sharp as he demanded to know what the hell had happened. How could an S-ranker like him end up in such a pathetic state? Sango let out a bitter laugh, his eyes filled with exhaustion and rage. It was a trap, he explained, one set by his own guild. The bastards had betrayed him. He had attended a guild event, but strangely enough, only Yong Suk's faction was present. That four-eyed bastard had planned it all. As they shared a drink, Sango had sensed that something was off, but before he could act, it was too late. The moment the wine touched his lips, his throat burned, and he started coughing up blood. That scumbag had poisoned him. Before he could even recover, they charged at him, intent on finishing the job. Barely clinging to consciousness, he fought with everything he had, forcing his way through them and escaping by the skin of his teeth. But the damage had been done. Now he was left like this, broken and bleeding. Jin Hyuk found it strange. Even if Sango had been poisoned, ordinary guild members shouldn't have been a match for him. But before he could ask further, Sango suddenly broke into a violent coughing fit. Lee Hyena panicked as she noticed the wounds that had been sealed by the potion were reopening. Jin Hyuk immediately realized the poison must be far stronger than he initially thought. Without wasting a second, he turned to Lee Hyena and asked if she knew exactly what kind of poison had been used on Sango and whether there was an antidote. She shook her head, saying she had no idea, but hesitantly asked if they could try using the antidotes that hunters typically carried. Jin Hyuk didn't even hesitate before dismissing the idea, knowing it wouldn't work against something this potent. They needed proper treatment, and fast. Without another word, he said they had to head to the hospital immediately. But Sango, still struggling to breathe, weakly refused. The hospital wasn't a safe option. They might come after him again. Jin Hyuk understood his concerns. If those bastards found out where they were, innocent civilians could get dragged into this mess too. He had no choice but to take a different route. Without wasting any more time, he turned to Lee Hyena and told her to get ready. They had to leave quickly. He had a plan. His home might have a way to treat the poison. As they got into the car and started moving, a red car almost crashed into them out of nowhere. It was Lee Hyena behind the wheel, her eyes widening in surprise as she rolled down the window to ask if they were okay. Jin Hyuk quickly assured her that he would take care of the guild master and told her to hurry up. Without wasting a second, she slammed her foot on the accelerator, sending the car roaring down the streets. She weaved left and right, drifting through narrow alleys like a pro. Her driving skills were no joke. As they came to a halt at a traffic signal, Jin Hyuk turned to Sango, telling him not to worry and to just stay conscious a little longer. They were almost there. But before he could say anything else, Lee Hyena spoke up, her voice tense. They had a problem. Someone was tailing them. Jin Hyuk's eyes narrowed as he glanced in the rearview mirror. It was the same red car from earlier. The moment the traffic light turned green, Lee Hyena asked what they should do. Jin Hyuk didn't hesitate. They couldn't head to his place while being followed. He had no choice. He told her to follow his directions. After a while, they finally pulled up at a construction site. Jin Hyuk told Lee Hyena that he would block their pursuer and handed her his location, quickly informing the elf to open the door for them. As he stepped out of the car, a man in a black hoodie approached, his voice dripping with mockery. Instead of CO Sango, a lower-ranked guy was stepping up to block him. Jin Hyuk scanned him, his mind racing. Only one person seemed to be tailing them. Just then his phone rang. It was Lee Hyena. She hadn't left yet. Annoyed, Jin Hyuk picked up and asked why she was still there. But before he could say another word, her panicked voice cut through the line. She told him to run, no matter what. The bastard standing in front of him was none other than S-Class Hunter Kong Juntae. Jin Hyuk's heart nearly stopped. An S-Class? Before he could fully process it, the bastard lunged at him, wasting no time in trying to end things quickly. But Jin Hyuk's presence detection skill kicked in at the last second, and his bat moved on its own, blocking the attack just in time. The sheer force of the strike sent the bat flying some distance away, making Jin Hyuk realize just how strong his opponent was. Without wasting another second, he quickly put some distance between them and told Lee Hyena to leave immediately. He couldn't hold this guy off for long, but he would catch up later. She hesitated for a moment, not wanting to abandon him, but in the end, she told him he better follow them. As Juntae watched the car speed off, he let out a mocking laugh, asking where they thought they were going. Without hesitation, he summoned his spear and prepared to strike. Lee Hyena, wasting no time, stomped on the accelerator, but before the car could move forward, Juntae had already launched himself into the air. He was certain he had them, until something else caught his attention. Jinhyu came at him with a powerful kick, but it barely missed. As expected from an S-ranker, Juntae dodged it with ease and immediately countered with his own kick. The impact sent Jinhyu skidding across the road, but the stubborn bastard landed on his feet just in time to watch the car disappear into the distance. Satisfied, he glanced at the rearview mirror, seeing Juntae's frustrated expression, almost as if the guy was crying inside. Jinhyu could only hope the others made it out alive. Letting out a relaxed sigh, Juntae turned to Jinhyu, annoyed that no one had warned him about an interference. Now irritated, he told Jinhyu he was a bit busy and ordered him to get lost if he wanted to live. But Jinhyu, pushing himself back up, scoffed and told him to shut his garbage mouth. He wasn't scared of someone like him. If Juntae wanted a fight, he'd give him one. Juntae smirked, clearly amused. He admitted he was impressed by Jinhyuk's guts, but within a second, he closed the distance, grabbed Jinhyuk by the collar, and sneered that this was getting entertaining. Without wasting another moment, the fight erupted, both exchanging blows at a relentless pace. Jinhyuk struggled to keep up, the sheer speed and strength of Juntae overwhelming him, but Juntae, on the other hand, looked absolutely thrilled. It had been a while since he'd found someone who could actually challenge him. With a grin, he urged Jinhyuk to show him what he had. Then, without warning, Juntae tightened his grip, pulled back, and with both hands on his spear, prepared a lethal strike. Jinhyuk's instincts screamed at him. If that attack landed, he was dead. Without hesitation, he opened his inventory and equipped his mithril chainmail armor, knowing it would cut both physical and magical damage in half. Just as the armor settled onto his body, Juntae's spear struck his ribs with terrifying force, sending him flying backward. The impact rattled his entire body, but as he gasped for breath, he couldn't help but be grateful he had the armor. Juntae, watching him recover, narrowed his eyes. He had fought plenty of strong men before, but this one, he didn't recognize. Curiosity sparked in his mind as he muttered that he didn't recall anyone like Jinhyuk in Sengo's group. And then it clicked. He suddenly recalled a certain C-class hunter, the one who had taken down the Leviathan. Young-suk had mentioned him before, the one close to Co. Sengo. Jinhyuk stiffened. His identity was blown. Even if he got away now, it was only a matter of time before they tracked down his house. His priority had just changed. Escaping from this guy was now the only thing that mattered. Juntae, however, had a different idea. Instead of pressing the attack, he smirked and made an offer. He told Jinhyuk to forget about Co. Sengo and join forces with him instead. The new Titan Guild needed someone like him. Jinhyuk couldn't help but chuckle. It was almost pathetic. He had actually hesitated before the fight, but now, hearing this offer, he knew exactly where he stood. Without a second thought, he rejected it outright and told Juntae that they were going all the way to the end. And that's where this party. Back at our boy's house, the car of Secretary Lee Hyena sat parked outside, a clear sign that she had made it back safely in time. Inside, Lucia was focused on healing Guildmaster Sengo, her magic working through him as a soft glow surrounded his body. It seemed like her spell had worked, at least to some extent. Lee Hyena, watching anxiously, asked if he was okay now, but Lucia's expression remained serious. Without sugarcoating it, she admitted that this was as far as she could go. She then requested that they talk outside in the living room, away from the unconscious guildmaster. Once they settled, Lucia explained that while she had taken successful measures, the job wasn't completely done. The poison was simply too strong. Right now, Guildmaster Sengo wasn't feeling any pain, but that was only because of her magic, and it wouldn't last forever. Her words sent the secretary into a panic, and she immediately asked if there was any other way, anything that could fully cure him. Lucia took a moment to think. There might be one possibility. If that short-tempered dwarf could handle it, then maybe it could work. But for that, she needed access to the dungeon. And the key to that, none other than Jinhyuk himself. Turning back to Secretary Lee, she told her there might be a way, but it all depended on Jinhyuk. Without wasting another second, she asked where the hell he was. That was when Secretary Lee, still catching her breath, explained everything that had happened. Back to our boy, who is still struggling to hold his ground. It's clear now that this guy is seriously strong. Every attack is pushing Jinhyuk to his limits. Suddenly, he noticed something. Juntae lunged at him, spear in hand, aiming straight for a lethal strike, but Jin-hyuk barely managed to dodge in time. Frustrated by his evasiveness, Juntae made up his mind. He would take this fight to the bitter end. The attacks came relentlessly, each strike carrying enough force to shake the ground. One particularly powerful blow sent Jin-hyuk skidding backward. Seizing the moment, Juntae lunged forward and delivered a brutal punch straight to Jin-hyuk's face, throwing him off balance. Without giving him even a second to recover, Juntae followed up with a devastating kick to Jin-hyuk's left ribs. The impact was brutal, enough to send him flying and crashing hard on the ground. Juntae, now confident in his victory, scoffed as he looked down at his fallen opponent. With a smirk, he taunted Jin-hyuk, asking if that was all he had and where all that earlier energy had gone. Jin-hyuk, his body trembling, struggled to get back on his feet. He knew he was at his limit. He needed a potion right now. But with this bastard's non-stop attacks, there was no time to even reach for it. That left him with only one option. Gritting his teeth, he tightened his grip on his bat, preparing for a desperate counterattack. Juntae, clearly amused, mocked him, saying he should keep fighting, giving up would just be too boring. But Jin-hyuk didn't waste another second. Without hesitation, he lunged forward and swung his bat with everything he had. This time, faster and stronger. But it hit nothing but air. Juntae dodged effortlessly, and before Jin-hyuk could react, a brutal knee strike connected straight with his face, sending him crashing into a nearby container, blood dripping from his mouth. Determined to end this fight, Juntae didn't hesitate. With a smirk, he hurled his spear straight at Jin-hyuk, who knew he had to move. If he didn't, he was dead. He couldn't let that happen. He still had unfinished business, and Lucia would kill him herself if he died before their smashing session. At the very last second, he managed to shift just enough to avoid a fatal hit. Juntae, surprisingly impressed, chuckled and told Jin-hyuk to reconsider his offer to become his underling. But even in pain, Jin-hyuk scoffed and called it nonsense. Annoyed, Juntae clenched his fist, preparing to strike and finally end this once and for all. But before he could land the finishing blow, an arrow shot straight at him, making both him and Jin-hyuk freeze in shock. Jin-hyuk's eyes immediately recognized the arrow, and despite the pain, a slight smile crept onto his face. A little while earlier, Lucia had been tracking Jin-hyuk's location using Apple Maps. But, considering it was her first time using it, things weren't exactly going smoothly. She frowned at the screen, frustrated by how confusing it was. She should have just used Google Maps instead. The map instructed her to turn left in 200 meters, and without wasting a second, she took a huge leap forward, muttering to herself that Jin-hyuk better not die. After all, if he did, she wouldn't get to taste him. Air, his delicacies, of course. Back on the battlefield, the arrow shot by Lucia detonated with an earth-shaking explosion, sending a powerful shockwave rippling through the air. Juntae's heart nearly jumped out his chest as he watched the sheer destruction unfold before him. His hands trembled slightly. Had he just witnessed that, right? The sheer power packed into that arrow made him question everything, and for a moment, he almost pissed himself. What kind of monster was she? Just as he was trying to regain his composure, Lucia arrived, dust swirling around her feet. Thank God she made it in time. Otherwise, her precious chocolates would have been gone, and that would have been a real disaster. But something about her didn't sit right with Juntae. She didn't look overwhelmingly strong, and yet she had fired that devastating shot like it was nothing. Suspicion crept into his mind, and he decided to test things himself. He made his way toward Jin-hyuk, who was still impaled by the spear, and grabbed the weapon. As soon as he pulled it out, a sharp, unexpected pain shot through his body. His legs gave out, and before he knew it, he was on the ground. Gritting his teeth, he glanced at Lucia, forcing a mocking grin. In a voice dripping with sarcasm, he sneered, asking if she had come running to save her little boyfriend. But Lucia remained unfazed, standing tall with an icy expression. She didn't even acknowledge his taunts. Clearly, she had no interest in entertaining the bastard who had nearly killed her sugar daddy. Juntae's irritation flared at her indifference. He was being ignored by her. Gritting his teeth, he gathered all his energy and prepared his best attack. If she wanted to act tough, he would break that confidence. Channeling every ounce of power he had, he lunged at her with his full strength. But just as his spear was about to strike, Lucia calmly raised her hand and stopped it. Just like that. His mind short-circuited. What the hell had just happened? His strongest attack, the one that had crushed countless enemies before, was stopped with nothing but a single hand. His fingers tightened around the spear as disbelief and rage surged through him. This wasn't possible. Who the hell was she? Lucia, however, barely looked interested. She glanced at him like he was an idiot before scoffing and calling him a fool. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she clenched her fingers around the spear. The weapon groaned under the pressure. Juntae's heart pounded in his chest as he realized what was happening. She was breaking it with her bare hands. A sense of dread crawled up his spine as cracks spread across the spear's shaft. Then, with one final squeeze, the entire weapon shattered into useless fragments. Panic seized Juntae as he instinctively activated his shield. If her raw strength was this ridiculous, he wasn't going to take any chances. But it didn't matter. Lucia moved in an instant, piercing through his defense like it was paper, and before he could react, her fist crashed straight into the center of his chest. The impact sent him flying backward, his body skidding across the battlefield as he gasped for air. Jinhyuk, still watching, couldn't help but feel a mix of awe and disbelief. Just how strong was she? Even Juntae, who had been so full of himself just moments ago, lay on the ground, stunned and struggling to comprehend what had just happened. His pride was completely shattered. He refused to believe it. How could he, a top hunter, be getting his ass handed to him by a woman? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Was she an S-class hunter from another country? No, that didn't make sense. There wasn't a single record of a hunter like her anywhere in the world. Lucia turned her attention to Jinhyuk, her sharp gaze scanning him for any lingering injuries. Without wasting a second, she asked if he could move. Jinhyuk, still feeling the aftermath of the fight but unwilling to show weakness, nodded in agreement. But Lucia wasn't done yet. Her expression turned serious as she bluntly asked if he wanted that bastard dead. Jinhyuk, despite everything, shook his head. No, killing him wasn't enough. He wanted to be the one to personally beat the crap out of Juntae. That bastard had gotten away with too much, and Jinhyuk wasn't about to let it slide. Turning to Juntae, he made it clear they were done for today, but next time, there would be no escape. Juntae, now fully realizing how badly things had turned against him, could feel a growing warmth in his pants, an unpleasant confirmation that his body had completely betrayed him. If things kept going at this rate, soon those wet patches wouldn't just be sweat, they'd be a full-blown disaster. But still, his pride wouldn't let him back down entirely. Putting on his best tough guy act, he scoffed, pretending that he was also exhausted and simply choosing to end the fight. With a forced smirk, he threw out one last threat, warning them that next time, he wouldn't just fight, he'd kill them both. And with that, he made his retreat, not daring to look back. With the battlefield finally quiet, Lucia focused on healing Jinhyuk's wounds. She worked quickly and efficiently, while he downed 2 bottles of stamina potions like a man dying of thirst. The process felt like it dragged on forever, but eventually the wound fully closed. Lucia stood up, stretching slightly, and assured him that he should be able to move now. Thankfully, it wasn't as serious as it had looked. Jinhyuk tested his body, rolling his shoulder and flexing his fingers. He was genuinely amazed. There wasn't even a scar left behind. Grinning, he glanced at Lucia and casually remarked that with skills like hers, she was basically a cool, OP character straight out of game. Lucia, however, just stared at him, looking more confused than anything. Seeing her blank expression, he quickly cleared his throat and explained that it was just a compliment. Deciding to change the topic, Jinhyuk asked about Guild Master Sango's condition. Lucia let out a small sigh, explaining that he was stable for now, but things weren't looking great. She admitted that while she had done what she couldn't treat him completely. However, there was still a chance maybe the dwarf could help. Jinhyuk didn't hesitate. With his identity now exposed, there was no telling when the next attack might come. He had no time to waste. Sharing a quick nod with Lucia, the two of them leaped into action, heading straight for the dungeon. Every second counted, and Jinhyuk knew one thing for sure. Whatever was coming next, he had to be ready. The scene shifted to the dwarf's workshop deep within the dungeon, where the usual chaos awaited. As expected, the moment Jinhyuk stepped inside, the old dwarf let out an exasperated sigh before launching straight into his usual barking. And honestly, who could blame him? Every single time the dwarf assigned Jinhyuk a task, the guy vanished for weeks. And when he finally returned, he never actually completed the job. No, instead, he always brought some fresh disaster for the poor old man to deal with. This time, however, Jin Hyuk had truly outdone himself. Not only had he failed to bring back what was needed, but he had also dragged in Sango, who was barely clinging to life in a poisoned state. The dwarf took one look at the unconscious man and let out a string of curses, calling Jin Hyuk a complete idiot. But, as always, Jin Hyuk only scratched the back of his head, muttered a half-assed apology, and insisted that they should focus on treating Sango first. The dwarf let out another long-suffering sigh and told him it wasn't that simple. Sango had been poisoned by basilisk venom, one of the nastiest poisons out there. An antidote was needed, but the problem was that the necessary ingredients weren't available here in the dungeon. Without them, there was no way to cure him. The old man then shot Jin Hyuk a look and asked if Lucia hadn't mentioned this to him beforehand. Jin Hyuk blinked, clearly caught off guard. Maybe Uncle might have something? That was his immediate thought. To him, the dwarf was practically a walking treasure chest, one that somehow had everything inside. But the old man only scoffed, shaking his head in disbelief before muttering that Jin Hyuk should wait while he figured something out. Meanwhile, a weak voice called out. Sango had finally regained some consciousness, though his face was still pale and covered in cold sweat. He looked around, confused, before turning his gaze to Jin Hyuk and asking in a strained voice where they were. Jin Hyuk glanced at him and, without missing a beat, told him to hold off on the questions for now. He understood that the guild master must have a lot on his mind, but for now he should just think of this place as one of Jin Hyuk's abilities. Sango, though still weak, felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. It wasn't just about saving his life. Jin Hyuk had chosen to trust him. With difficulty, he muttered his thanks. But Jin Hyuk only shrugged, his expression remaining calm. If anything, it was the guild master who had trusted him first. Sometime later, the dwarf finally returned, holding a potion in his hands. He handed it to Sango before turning to Jin Hyuk with a grim look. The medicine would buy them time, but only for half a day. If they failed to find the antidote before then, Sango would die. Jin Hyuk's expression darkened. Half a day wasn't much time. Letting out a dull sigh, he asked if there was any other way, anything, that could keep Sango alive longer. But the old man shook his head. If there was another solution, he didn't know about it. Jin Hyuk clenched his fists, his mind racing. There was the Hunter Specialty Hospital. They might have the antidote. But as Sango had said before, the moment they made a move, their enemies would come after them like bloodthirsty hounds. A direct approach was risky. Then, suddenly an idea sparked in his mind. His eyes sharpened as the pieces of a plan started falling into place. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to get the antidote without leading their enemies straight to them. Back at his home, Jin Hyuk and Lee Hyena carefully placed Sango on the bed, letting him rest while they moved to the living room. The tension in the air was thick, but there was no time to dwell on emotions. Jin Hyuk, keeping his voice steady, explained everything that had happened in the dungeon. As he spoke, he pulled out his phone and held it up, his expression serious. This was it, their last hope. If this didn't work, they were completely screwed. Somewhere else, in a dimly lit office filled with expensive decor, a phone rang. This wasn't just any call. It was reaching a black market dealer, the same one Jin Hyuk had made a deal with earlier. As the very definition of wealth and luxury, the man never settled for less. Even his iPhone was always the latest maxed out model, upgraded the moment a new version was released. Seeing the caller ID, he immediately picked up, his tone shifting to a respectful one as he addressed Jin Hyuk as Sir and asked why he was calling at such a late hour. Jin Hyuk didn't waste a second. With a firm voice, he got straight to the point. He needed an antidote for basilisk venom. The dealer, caught slightly off guard, admitted that he didn't have it on hand, but he knew a doctor who could arrange it. His curiosity piqued. He asked why Jin Hyuk needed something so rare. But Jin Hyuk wasn't in the mood for small talk. Brushing off the question, he simply stated that he had run into some trouble. What mattered more was keeping this entire transaction confidential. The dealer, who valued Jin Hyuk as a VIP customer, didn't need any further convincing. Assuring him that everything would be handled discreetly, he asked for his address to send the doctor over. Ending the call with a smirk, Jin Hyuk turned to Lee Hyena and casually told her that the doctor would be arriving soon. At first, she just stared at him stunned. Could it really be this easy? The weight that had been crushing her chest for hours suddenly felt lighter, but she was still too overwhelmed to believe it completely. When Jin Hyuk reassured her that everything was under control, the relief hit her like a flood. She couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Her body trembled as she let out a shaky breath. whispering thank yous over and over again. After all the stress, the fear, the helplessness, this was the first time she could finally breathe. Not long after, the sound of a car pulling up outside signaled the arrival of the doctor. He wasted no time, stepping inside with an air of professionalism and immediately tending to Sango. After administering the antidote, he turned to them and delivered the final verdict. Sango would survive, but full recovery would take at least 2 weeks. Until then, he needed complete rest. No movement, no exertion, just time for the antidote to work its magic. As Jin-hyuk escorted the doctor outside and watched the car pull away, he let out a slow breath, but his mind refused to settle. The problem looming over him was far bigger than anything he had dealt with before. The guildmaster would take at least 2 weeks to recover, and during that time, the Titan Guild would be relentless in their pursuit. He knew they wouldn't just sit back and wait. They would come for him. And the truth was, even if Lucia stood by his side, there was only so much she could do. She was strong, but she wasn't invincible, and against an entire guild, even she had her limits. Then there was his own weakness. The fight against Juntae had been a brutal wake-up call. He had gone cocky, believing he could handle it, only to be beaten so badly that he barely walked away alive. That fight had exposed the harsh reality. He wasn't as strong as he thought he was. It wasn't just about being outmatched. It was the fact that he had been too naive to see it coming. He thought he was ready for war, but he was barely surviving battles. Even if the guildmaster recovered, Jin-hyuk wouldn't be of any real help. If anything, he would just get in the way. Before he could sink any deeper into frustration, Lucia arrived. One look at him, and she immediately understood what was running through his mind. Without hesitation, he admitted that after fighting that S-rank bastard, he had finally realized the bitter truth. He was too weak. But before he could say anything more, Lucia stepped closer and, without a shred of hesitation, agreed. He was weak. Her words were blunt, almost cutting, but there was no malice behind them. Only cold, undeniable truth. Jin-hyuk felt a flicker of irritation, but quickly swallowed it. She wasn't wrong. Before he could dwell on her words, Lucia continued. She asked if he truly wanted to change that, her voice serious and unwavering. Then she revealed that she had a way, something dangerous, something that came with risks. But if he was willing to go through with it, she promised he would come out stronger, strong enough to change everything. She met his eyes, her expression unreadable, and asked him straight, was he ready to take the gamble? Jin-hyuk's hesitation lasted only a moment. His thoughts cleared, his frustration hardened into resolve. He clenched his fists, took a deep breath, and with a determined look, he gave his answer. He would do it, no matter how risky it was. He had to become stronger. The next day arrived, and Jin-hyuk was busy double-checking the items in his inventory. Looked like he was really going to take the risk. Lucia had told him last night to be well prepared, and he had taken her words seriously. 300 mana potions, 300 health potions, his armor, and, of course, his trusty companion, Bat. But as he ran through his supplies, doubt lingered in his mind. Was this really enough? The place he was heading to wasn't just some random dungeon. It was the Dragon's Temple. Just as he was about to question himself again, a voice cut through his thoughts, asking if he had stored the return stone. He turned to see Lucia approaching, and right behind her, tailing like a silent shadow, was Secretary Lee Hyena. Jin-hyuk gave a slight nod, confirming that he had packed the return stone, his only escape route if things went to hell. Lucia took the stone from his hands, flipping it between her fingers with a sharp, assessing gaze. After a moment, she let out a quiet sigh of relief. At least they had one way out. That was something. Still, her expression hardened as she looked at him. With a serious face, she warned him about the dangers of the Dragon's Temple. The place wasn't just dangerous, it was a death trap. She knew exactly how stubborn and reckless he could be in his pursuit of strength, but she made one thing crystal clear. If he let greed take over, he would die. No hesitation, no second chances. If he felt he had reached his limit, he had to leave immediately. Jin-hyuk scratched his head, a small grin creeping onto his face. It was nice seeing Lucia worry about him like this. There was a warmth in her concern, something that reminded him that despite her sharp tongue, she truly cared. He reassured her, saying that if things got too dangerous, he would use the return stone without hesitation. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted when Lee Hyena stepped forward, her voice tinged with guilt. She hesitated for a second before apologizing for all the trouble she had caused him. But Jin-hyuk just shrugged it off, telling her there was no need to feel sorry. He wasn't the only one struggling. Everyone had their own battles, their own reasons to grow stronger. He wasn't going to dwell on the past. Then, turning back to Lucia, his expression softened. He told her, with absolute certainty, that he would be counting on her. She was the only one he could truly rely on, the one person he trusted without question. No matter what happened, he would come back for sure. Lucia simply nodded, her face unreadable. But deep down, she felt an unsettling weight settle in her chest. It was an unfamiliar feeling, something she didn't quite know how to put into words. The scene shifted as Jin-hyuk arrived at the entrance of the Dragon Temple. With zero hesitation, he pulled out the key and unlocked the massive gate. The door creaked open, and a sudden burst of intense light caught him off guard, forcing him to shield his eyes. As his vision adjusted, he found himself standing before the legendary temple, its sheer presence enough to make anyone shiver. The overwhelming energy in the air was suffocating, yet exhilarating. Lucia's words echoed in his mind. Don't get greedy, and leave if things get dangerous. But Jin-hyuk knew better. If he had planned to play it safe, he wouldn't have come here in the first place. No, he was here to see this through to the end. Stepping inside, he silently vowed that he wouldn't leave until he was strong enough to kick S-rank asses without breaking a sweat. As soon as he crossed the threshold, the temple doors rumbled and began to shut behind him. A heavy silence followed. Darkness swallowed everything around him, stretching endlessly in all directions. He walked forward, but with no source of light, he couldn't even tell if he was heading in the right direction. A faint doubt crossed his mind. Was he just wandering aimlessly in pitch black? Just as the thought surfaced, the entire space came to life. One by one, torches flared up, illuminating the grand hall. His eyes widened slightly as the flickering flames revealed towering knights standing in their favorite position straight. The whole scene had an eerie, majestic vibe, but Jin-hyuk? He walked in like he owned the damn place, striding confidently down the long carpet that stretched through the hall. The silence had been unbearable, so seeing some light was at least a relief. His gaze swept over the knights, standing rigidly around him. They looked unsettlingly lifelike, but for now, he figured they were just for decoration. He smirked at the thought and continued forward. Unfortunately, one knight took offense to being called a mere decoration, and instead of grumbling about it, he decided to settle the matter the old-fashioned way, with a sneak attack. Because let's be honest, even this tin-can wasn't stupid enough to challenge Jin-hyuk head-on. With a metallic screech, the knight drew his sword and lunged. But Jin-hyuk, ever the chocolate-loving menace, dodged effortlessly and created some distance. His brows furrowed slightly. Were these things monsters? His earlier words might have pissed him off, but honestly, he had expected something like this. Right on cue, the rest of the knights came to life, their armor clanking as they rushed toward him in a full-force assault. But Jin-hyuk? He was more than ready. A grin spread across his face as he dashed straight into the horde, excitement pulsing through his veins. He landed a clean hit on one knight, and in an instant, its armor crumbled into a heap of scrap. But as he stepped back, expecting a lifeless pile, the scattered pieces suddenly began moving, assembling themselves back together. Within moments, the knight was good as new. Jin-hyuk clicked his tongue. So that's how it was. He had definitely overestimated these flashy tin cans until they pulled off that little trick. But even as the knights reformed, he remained as cool as a cucumber. He had seen enough cursed artifacts and enchanted puppets to know exactly what was going on. They had cores inside. All he had to do was destroy those, and they wouldn't be getting back up again. If it had been the old Jin-hyuk, he might have panicked. But now, he was more than ready. Charging up his bat with crackling electricity, he leaped into the air, eyes locked on his targets. In a single, decisive strike, he slammed the bat into the ground, sending a powerful electric shockwave ripping through the entire hall. Within seconds, the knights convulsed as the electricity surged through their cores. Their armor vibrated violently, unable to withstand the attack. One by one, they collapsed, their metallic bodies clattering onto the floor, now nothing more than useless scrap. Jin-hyuk let out a satisfied sigh, cracking his neck as he surveyed the mess. First challenge? Cleared. He glanced at the fallen knights, smirking as he casually asked them how his tasted, electric attack. Not that they could answer, but hey, a little trash talk never hurt. The scene shifted to the Titan Guild, where Young-suk was practically seething with rage. His fists clenched as he paced the room, his frustration boiling over. That idiot Kang Jun-ae had completely screwed up. Not only had he failed to capture a man who was already poisoned, but he had also managed to make things even more complicated. Young-suk's jaw tightened as he turned to one of his underlings, demanding an update on the executives who had supported Seo Sango. The underling, sensing the tension, quickly reported that they had been confined and completely cut off from the outside world, ensuring they couldn't communicate with anyone. At least something had been handled properly. The white-haired bastard gave a small nod of approval, telling him he had done well and to continue keeping an eye on them. But before the conversation could continue, a loud crash echoed through the room as a wall practically exploded inward. Jun-tae stormed in, barking out Young-suk's name, his face twisted in fury. Without wasting a second, he demanded to know why he hadn't been informed about the damn obstacles beforehand. Young-suk barely spared him a glance, as he coolly responded that all necessary information had been provided. But Jun-tae, still fuming, shot back, asking where the hell that archer girl had come from then. Before the situation could escalate further, the underlings foolishly tried to step in and defuse the tension. Big mistake. He was rewarded with a well-deserved punch, reminding him why staying loyal to this bunch of bastards was a terrible life decision. Meanwhile, Young-suk's mind wandered back to the archer girl, Lucia, the same girl who had saved their sorry asses when they were about to be smashed by the tyrant boys. His gaze darkened as he turned to Jun-tae and flatly asked if he had lost to her. As expected, the crybaby did what all sore losers do. He shifted the blame, whining that his spear had broken too early in the fight. But Young-suk was an idiot. He saw right through it. If Jun-tae had struggled that much, then the girl was undoubtedly strong. Taking a deep breath, he exhaled sharply, realizing they now had another problem to deal with. It wasn't just Kang Jin-hyuk anymore. The girl had to be dealt with too. Straightening up, he told Jun-tae that in order to take control of the guild, their first priority had to be eliminating Seo Sango. He was confident that Sango was already on the verge of death, but on the off chance he survived, things could get tricky. The man used to be powerful enough to put up a serious fight. And as for Jin-hyuk and the archer girl, Young-suk would make sure the guild's members tracked them down and finished them off. Jun-tae, gritting his teeth, tried to act tough, pretending like he was ready to handle it himself. It was almost laughable. Just hours ago, he had been practically pissing himself, and now he wanted to act all high and mighty. But Young-suk let him have his little moment. After all, once their mission was complete, the position of Titan Guild Master would be his. Back to our boy, standing before a massive door. He had already taken care of those damned armors, and now it was time to move on to the second room. But the moment he stepped inside, something fell off. The room was almost empty. No traps, no monsters, just an eerie silence that sent a chill down his spine. That's when he saw it. Seated on a grand throne was a man with sharp blue eyes, his presence both imposing and strangely calm. But the strangest part? His karma level was 0. That alone should have been reassuring. Yet Jin-hyuk couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up his skin. Something about this man wasn't right. The moment their eyes met, the man's lips curled into a small smile. It had been a long time since he had seen a challenger, and he looked genuinely pleased. Jin-hyuk, keeping his guard up, greeted him politely and asked who he was. Instead of answering, the man simply turned the question back at him, curious about what Jin-hyuk thought. Without overthinking, Jin-hyuk replied that he definitely didn't seem like an ordinary person. The man's expression turned serious as he asked if it was because he carried no karma. That caught Jin-hyuk off guard. His body stiffened for a moment. How the hell did this old man know that? His mind raced, trying to process just who he was dealing with. Someone who knew about karma levels, and more importantly, someone who seemed to know about his abilities. The old man slowly stood up, his gaze sharp and knowing. He spoke again, asking if Jin-hyuk had come all the way here carrying something cursed and filled with resentment. Jin-hyuk froze. His mind scrambled for an explanation. Was this guy reading his thoughts or something? The eerie sense of unease only deepened. Deciding there was no point in hiding it, Jin-hyuk reached into his inventory and pulled out Auron stone. Holding it up, he explained that he had come to purify it. The old man studied the stone, his fingers grazing the air above it, and within seconds he understood. The core had been formed by devouring countless lives, absorbing their hatred and grudges over time. But to him, this wasn't much a problem. Without hesitation, he raised his hand above the stone, and in an instant, waves of powerful blue magic filled the room. The energy surged, crackling in the air as the cursed red glow of the stone slowly faded, bit by bit, replaced by a calm, purified blue. Within seconds, the purification was complete. Jinhyuk stood there, eyes wide in awe. The ominous aura that had been clinging to the stone, the suffocating pressure he had felt, was completely gone. A deep sense of relief washed over him, and without hesitation, he bowed his head in gratitude, thanking the old man sincerely. But the old man wasn't done yet. With a knowing look, he told Jinhyuk to hold onto his gratitude. He should save it for when his true purpose here was fulfilled. Jinhyuk frowned, not understanding what he meant. Before he could ask, the old man simply raised his hand once more. Blue magic surged forward, engulfing Jinhyuk's entire body. The air around him crackled with energy, and in that moment, the realization hit. Whatever was about to happen, the real challenge had only just begun. The trials had already begun. In the next second, Jinhyuk found himself transported into a void-like space. Darkness stretched infinitely in all directions, an eerie silence wrapping around him. Slowly, he opened his eyes, his mind still adjusting to the sudden shift. That's when a loud, commanding voice echoed through the emptiness. An old man's voice, clear and sharp, warning him not to let his guard down unless he wanted to lose his life. Jinhyuk's head snapped left and right, his eyes scanning the surroundings, but there was nothing, just endless blackness. A deep frown settled on his face as he wondered if this was the true trial of the Dragon's Temple. Before he could dwell on it further, the sound of footsteps caught his attention. Someone, or something, was approaching. His gaze locked onto the figure emerging from the darkness, and he immediately recognized it. Well, look who it was, the same armored knight he had faced back in the first room. Letting out an exaggerated sigh, he loudly questioned if he had been transported to another space just to kick some more metal asses. Honestly, looking at this bleak battleground, he couldn't blame himself for thinking that was the case. At first, he assumed he was only up against one knight again. But the moment he met those glowing red eyes, a sharp chill ran down his spine. There was something different about this one. Unlike the previous tin cans he had smashed through, this knight radiated an aura that practically screamed danger. And yet, our boy, as confident as ever, couldn't help but throw in some attitude. With a smirk, he casually remarked that this knight didn't look much different from the weaklings he had fought before. Then, with a cocky tilt of his head, he asked if this guy was just a warm-up and if the real challenge would be showing up later. But the knight didn't bother entertaining his arrogance. Instead of responding, he simply stated that the trials had begun and that Jinhyuk should prepare himself. That was it. No banter, no unnecessary words, just a cold, direct warning. Jinhyuk's amusement flickered for a second. Well, that was new. The previous knights were nothing but mindless husks, yet this one could actually talk. That alone was enough to make him acknowledge that this opponent was different from the rest. But before he could think too much about it, the knight moved. And damn, did he move fast. In a blink, the knight lunged forward with terrifying speed, his blade cutting through the air like a streak of death. Jinhyuk's instincts screamed at him, and in that split second, realization hit him like a truck. He had completely underestimated this opponent. The scene shifted to two figures dressed entirely in black, leaping effortlessly across rooftops, their movements swift and calculated. They landed silently in front of Third Man, most likely their boss. Turns out, these were the Titan Guild pursuers, sent by none other than that bastard Young-suk. But thanks to Lucia's magic, they were completely blind to Jinhyuk's whereabouts, unable to track down his house, no matter how hard they tried. Frustration twisted the leader's face. He knew damn well that if he returned without completing the job, he was as good as dead. Gritting his teeth, he barked at his underlings, making it clear they had no choice. They had to find their target, no matter what. And if that meant tearing down the entire damn neighborhood, so be it. Without hesitation, he ordered them to start destroying every single house in the area, convinced that sooner or later, they'd flush out their target. Well, bad move. All that noise and chaos would only do one thing: cut the distance between their sorry asses and Lucia's arrows. Before they could even make a sound, the arrow had already done its job, cutting through the air in an instant. The shot was brutal, straight to the neck of the loudest one in the group. Yeah, the same bossy bastard who had been barking orders to burn everything down. Well, rest in peace, buddy. The remaining two stood there, completely stunned, their brains struggling to process what the hell just happened. Before they could even react, another arrow found its mark, another clean headshot. And just like that, there was only one left. Realizing the absolute disaster unfolding before him, the last guy didn't waste time thinking. He just ran. As fast as his legs could carry him, he bolted, hoping to escape whatever nightmare had just wiped out his crew. But he wasn't fast enough. Not faster than her. Our favorite elf, she didn't even break a sweat as she moved in, her knife slashed. One swift motion, and he was down, sent straight to join his dear companions in the afterlife. After taking care of 3 criminal souls, Lucia finally arrived home. The moment she stepped inside, Hyona, in concern, immediately asked where she had disappeared. Plopping down on the sofa, Lucia casually explained that the Titan Guild's tracking team had been sniffing around, which instantly sent Hyona into panic mode. But before she could spiral, Lucia reassured her that she had already dealt with them permanently. Munching on Jinhyuk's food supplies like it was just another day, Lucia continued, grumbling about how those bastards had been ready to blow up the entire neighborhood just to find a single damn house. And those guys must be convinced by now that Sango must be here. With a sigh, she told Hyona that if those bastards came back in full force, there was no way she could protect everyone. The only real hope was for Jinhyuk to return soon. He was the only one who could get them through this mess. And, on a slightly more urgent note, the food stash was running dangerously low. The scene shifted to the armored knight, who suddenly surged forward at an insane speed. Jinhyuk barely had time to react. 1 second, the knight was at a distance, and the next, he was right in front of him. His body froze, terror locking him in place. Before he could even think about dodging, the knight's blade flashed, slicing clean through his neck. Just like that, it was over. Jinhyuk died. But then he woke up. Gasping for air, his hands shot up to his neck, frantically checking for the wound. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized he was perfectly fine. Looking around, he found himself right back at the door of the second room. Confused and shaken, he yelled out, demanding to know what the hell had just happened. He was so damn sure his head had been lopped off, so sure that he didn't even get enough time to wet his pants. But now he had plenty of time for that. Suddenly, a voice interrupted Jinhyuk, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned his head toward the source, only to hear a chuckle. The voice explained, almost amused, that the place where he had just died was nothing more than a virtual space. There was no need to panic. Even if he died there, it wouldn't be real. That's when recognition hit him. The voice belonged to the same elder who had purified his Alron stone. Before Jinhyuk could say anything, the old man continued, telling him bluntly that he was still far too weak. The Dragon Temple wasn't just a place for growth. It was a place of trials. That was why he had warned Jinhyuk to never let his guard down. He advised him to grow stronger and try again later, as if failure was just some minor inconvenience. But for Jinhyuk, those words sent him straight into panic mode. He didn't have the luxury of taking casual advice. If his hideout was discovered, then Sango and Hyena would be in danger. And if Juntae showed up, he wouldn't even be able to land a scratch on that bastard. Realizing the urgency of the situation, he started banging on the door, yelling for it to be opened. He admitted he had been careless, swearing he wouldn't repeat the same mistake. He didn't have time to sit around. If he didn't get stronger fast, then none of it would matter. The old man remained unfazed, calmly warning him that no matter how desperate he was, it wouldn't change the outcome. If he rushed in now, he would still lose, and in just a few seconds at that. But Jinhyuk wasn't backing down. Raising his voice, he shot back that he could win if he didn't let his guard down this time. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the elder let out a soft hum, as if he had found something amusing. He asked why Jinhyuk was so desperate. Why? Even after experiencing death, he still refused to give up. Jinhyuk didn't hesitate. If he had been afraid of dying, he wouldn't have come here in the first place. He had already walked the thin line between life and death, and he had made his choice. If he was going to die, then so be it. He would die here, endlessly, until he got strong enough. The old man's expression shifted, his amusement turning into something more genuine. After a brief pause, the massive gates creaked open. With a voice that carried both intrigue and approval, he declared that Jinhyuk would be granted an exception. He would be allowed to re-challenge the trial. As Jinhyuk stepped through the gate, a heavy tension settled over him. The atmosphere alone was enough to put him on edge, but he pushed past it, summoning his trusty bat. Without missing a beat, he called out to the knight, mocking him as a tin can and demanding a rematch. The knight shot him a piercing glare but admitted, with a hint of amusement, that returning after experiencing death took guts. Even so, admiration didn't change the fact that Jin-hyuk was still trembling slightly, barely managing to hide his fear. Gripping his bat tightly, he forced a wide grin and declared that last time, he had been careless, but this time he wasn't going to die as hollowly as he died before. There was no more time for words. In an instant, the knight leaped into the air, blade poised to strike. Jin-hyuk barely had time to react before their weapons clashed, sending shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. His arms ached as he struggled against the sheer force of the attack, gritting his teeth as the pressure nearly overwhelmed him. The knight, sensing his struggle, let out a mocking chuckle and remarked that it seemed Jin-hyuk had finally come to his senses. But Jin-hyuk wasn't about to back down. Focusing his aura into his legs, he gathered all his strength, and with a roar, he pushed forward, sending the knight sliding backward, creating some much-needed distance between them. But the recoil of the attack sent him stumbling as well. Stunned, Jin-hyuk could only stare, trying to process just how monstrous this opponent truly was. A direct confrontation was impossible. He knew that now. He had to be smarter. Strike, retreat, wait for an opening, and strike again. That was his only chance. Steeling himself, he lunged forward, moving in perfect sync with his plan. The knight, rather than being angered, seemed impressed. He acknowledged Jin-hyuk's ability to wield aura, but of course there was a catch. Before Jin-hyuk could react, the knight's blade struck with brutal precision, sending him flying through the air. As pain shot through his body, the knight coldly explained that while Jin-hyuk had learned to channel aura into his legs, but he left his upper body completely exposed. Still airborne, Jin-hyuk clenched his teeth as realization hit him. He barely had time to land before another thought sent a chill down his spine. How did the knight know exactly where to strike? His mind raced, a tense expression overtaking his face as he wondered if his opponent could read his thoughts. The eerie familiarity of it reminded him of his fight with Jun-tae, who had also predicted his every move with terrifying accuracy. But before he could analyze further, the knight lunged once more. His voice carried an air of finality as he told Jin-hyuk that while his spirit was admirable, if this was all he had, then he could die in peace. The knight swung his blade with lethal precision, expecting to end the fight in an instant. But to his surprise, Jin-hyuk blocked just in time and retaliated with a crushingly heavy strike. The impact sent the knight staggering backward, but just like before, the recoil also forced Jin-hyuk to skid back. However, this time, Jin-hyuk revealed something crucial. The knight had been predicting his attacks by reading his aura, giving him an unfair advantage in battle. The knight acknowledged his talent but scoffed, saying that no matter how skilled he was, the outcome for Jin-hyuk wouldn't change. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Jin-hyuk realized that if he kept using aura like he had been, he was as good as dead. He needed a new approach. Without hesitation, he reached into his inventory, retrieved a mana potion, and downed it in one gulp. His plan was simple but risky. He would envelop his entire body in aura, leaving no gap for the knight to read his movements. But the knight wasn't interested in giving him breathing room. He urged Jin-hyuk to focus on the fight, launching another strike. Their weapons clashed, sending shockwaves that were at least 10 times stronger than before. The knight instantly realized what Jin-hyuk had done and asked if he had really wrapped his entire body in aura. Jin-hyuk confirmed it without hesitation. The knight then questioned the potion he had just consumed, wondering if borrowed strength could truly be called his own. But Jin-hyuk didn't care. He firmly stated that as long as he could win, he would use whatever means necessary. Clearly impressed, the knight smirked and told him to prove it. What followed was a fierce exchange of blows, dodging, countering, and attacking with flawless precision. Amidst the relentless battle, the knight couldn't help but praise Jin-hyuk, calling him somewhat formidable. But Jin-hyuk, now brimming with confidence, knew he was far more than that. The fight raged on, neither willing to back down. The knight acknowledged that Jin-hyuk was holding up better than expected, but Jin-hyuk wasn't finished yet. He gripped his bat tightly, channeling crackling electricity through it, his ace move. The air itself buzzed with power, violent sparks surging around him. Then, with lightning coursing through his weapon, Jin-hyuk leaped into the air, ready to unleash the perfect strike. Just as the electrified bat came crashing down toward the knight. The scene abruptly shifted to the city. A car sat parked in the designated parking lane, its occupants remaining still as the chaos outside unfolded. Inside, Lee Jun-chul, a well-known black market dealer, kept a close eye on the scene. His driver, growing impatient, finally asked why he wasn't stepping out. Without shifting his gaze, Lee Jun-chul simply told him to wait. Through the windshield, he watched as members of the Titan Guild frantically searched the area, clearly hunting for Seo Sango. The driver quickly understood the situation. Getting out now would only draw unnecessary attention. Reaching into his pocket, Lee Jun-chul pulled out his iPhone, a custom version without any logo. He instructed the driver to stay put, saying he needed to make a call. Dialing a number, he soon found himself connected to Lee Hyena. However, she didn't recognize the caller. Without hesitation, he introduced himself and asked if she had heard of him through Kong Jin-hyuk. After a brief pause, Hyena confirmed. Jin-hyuk had indeed mentioned him as the one who arranged for Dr. Lee. Satisfied, Lee Jun-chul wasted no time and got straight to the point. He inquired about Seo Sango's condition, to which Hyena expressed her gratitude, informing him that thanks to the treatment he had helped arrange, Sango was now safe. Nodding to himself, Lee Jun-chul then revealed that he was currently near their hideout. However, there was a problem. The entire area was crawling with Titan Guild members, and judging by their relentless searching, they seemed convinced that Seo Sango was inside. Hyena listened in silence as he laid out the situation, but he continued. If things remained as they were, they would soon have no choice but to face a full Titan Guild blockade right outside their doorstep. But, with absolute confidence, he assured her there was no need to worry. He had a way to resolve this issue. And to discuss it properly, he wanted to meet in person. Back on the battlefield, the fight raged on. Jin-hyuk had thrown his most powerful attack, putting everything he had into it, only for the knight to stop it effortlessly. The bastard even had the nerve to mock him for it. Frustration boiled in Jin-hyuk's veins, his mind racing to process what had just happened. He had been sure that this attack would do some serious damage, yet the knight stood there, completely unscathed, as if it had been nothing more than a light breeze. With a cold, unwavering tone, the knight told him he was still too inexperienced, too weak, and now that he had wasted his strongest move, it wouldn't work again. Jin-hyuk stood there, dumbfounded, his confidence shaken. Before he could react, the knight scoffed, calling him pathetic, and in the blink of an eye, delivered a brutal kick. The sheer speed was overwhelming. Jin-hyuk barely had time to register what happened before he was sent staggering backward, struggling to keep his balance. Well, guys, if you're enjoying the video so far, don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment on what you think. Now, let's continue. With a fair distance now between them, the knight coldly asked if Jin-hyuk was done with his little hidden tricks or if he had anything else left. If so, he might as well bring it on now. Jin-hyuk clenched his fists, taking a deep breath as he looked at his opponent. Even his strongest attack had failed. That thought gnawed at him, but backing down was an option. Shooting the knight a determined glare, he declared that he had nothing else hidden, but that didn't matter. He was going to gamble everything, his strength, his will, his very life, and fight to the death if he had to. The knight, now seemingly done with his warm-up, let out a low chuckle and channeled power into his sword. Magic surged around the blade, crackling with energy as he told Jin-hyuk that from now on, he would play along properly. Jin-hyuk's eyes widened as he recognized the power flowing through the weapon. That energy was a divine power? His mind raced as he blurted out the question, wondering if the knight was actually a paladin. With a smirk, the knight denied it, saying he wasn't a paladin, but he was close enough. Then, in a strong, commanding voice, he told Jin-hyuk to get ready. Jin-hyuk grinned, rolling his shoulders as he steadied his stance. Ready? He was more than ready. With unwavering confidence, he told the knight to come at him anytime, because no matter what, he was going to become stronger. With that, both warriors lunged at each other. Jin-hyuk knew that fancy tricks wouldn't work here. All he needed was raw strength, a full force strike. And so, the real battle began. Jin-hyuk and the knight clashed, and the impact of their energies sent rumbling shockwaves across the battlefield. Just by looking at our boy's face, you could tell this was the expression of someone silently muttering, "I'm so fucked." But he knew one thing for sure. If he backed down now, he was dead. So, gritting his teeth, he decided to pour every last bit of his aura into this fight and settle it once and for all. That's when the armored knight noticed something strange. His precious sword was starting to crack. And the cause? None other than our favorite Red Menace. For a second, the knight looked genuinely thrown off, feeling something he hadn't in a long time. But he wasn't slow to catch on. He realized Jin Hyuk had used his aura at a critical moment, not just to boost his own strength, but to show his desperate hunger for power, a drive that had always been burning inside him. Even so, the knight gathered himself, pushing Jin Hyuk back with a forceful blast. But in doing so, his sword completely shattered. Refusing to give in, he focused all his remaining energy into the broken blade and unleashed a final, powerful swing. Somehow, against all odds, Jin Hyuk managed to block it. In the next cut, Jin Hyuk collapsed to his knees. He had somehow managed to block that fatal blow, but now his aura was completely drained. He didn't even have the strength left to save his own ass by running away. The knight calmly lifted his blade, restoring it to perfect condition in no time using his divine power. Then he pointed the weapon straight at Jin Hyuk, who was utterly spent, with no tricks left up his sleeve. But strangely, the knight didn't strike. He just stood there, almost like he was waiting for something. Breathing heavily, Jin Hyuk told the knight that he had given it everything he had. He didn't have any regrets left. If the knight was going to kill him, he should just get it over with. Besides, even if he died here, it wasn't truly the end for him. And one thing was certain, he would challenge the knight again and again, no matter what. He had to get stronger. The knight then spoke, telling Jin Hyuk that the trial was over, and that Jin Hyuk had misunderstood something. This trial was never about defeating the knight. As he spoke, the knight began to dissolve into golden dust. He revealed that he was not just the opponent, but also the examiner and the judge. Jin Hyuk, still confused and desperate to know whether he had passed or failed, struggled to process it all. The knight, before disappearing completely in a flash of golden light, said that while Jin Hyuk still had a lot to improve on, for now, he had passed the trial. As the dust finally settled, Jin Hyuk picked up on something different. Out of the fading cloud, an old man stepped forward, calm, steady, and weirdly impressed that our boy had stuck it out to the damn end. And then it hit. This geezer was the same knight Jin Hyuk had been throwing hands with for nearly a decade. Without warning, the old bastard flicked Jin Hyuk on the forehead for interrupting him mid-sentence, like some pissed-off grandpa. But true to his word, he was ready to spill the secret to getting stronger. He placed a hand on Jin Hyuk's head, and whatever the hell he started doing sent shivers crawling down Jin Hyuk's spine. Before fading away, the old man dropped one last bomb. Jin Hyuk had to connect with the divine. Then, just like that, he began disappearing into thin air, but not without leaving a little gift behind. Guess he'd taken a real liking to our stubborn idiot. Fast forward to the next scene. Jin Hyuk found himself floating in some endless void, butt-ass naked. Not that he gave a damn. Strength first, pants later. That's the mindset you need if you want to get anywhere. And then shit got real. A giant-ass dragon came charging at him. When it roared, the sound damn near ripped his ears off. And yeah, our boy clutched his head like anybody else would. The dragon told him not to fear, like, seriously, dude? Maybe don't roar like a freaking monster if you don't want people shitting their pants. Before he could even react, the dragon started spinning like a goddamn tornado. The whirlwind grew bigger and bigger until the beast just vanished into it. Jin Hyuk panicked hard, but from that raging spin, a golden light shot straight toward him. On instinct, he threw all his focus into his palms. Somewhere in the swirling void, the dragon's voice echoed one last time, telling him again, don't fear. Accept the damn power of the divine. Back at Jin Hyuk's house, somehow Lee Junchul had managed to sneak inside, rambling about his upcoming plans. But Lucia wasn't listening. All she cared about was Jin Hyuk's return. She was worried sick about him. Suddenly, she felt something. Instinctively, she headed toward the room where the dungeon gate usually appeared. Seeing the gate glowing quietly, she finally let out a breath of relief. He was okay. As she waited, a powerful aura began to leak from a gate, and then a figure stepped out. It was our boy, but one look at his eyes made my skin crawl. Lucia, too, froze for a second. What the hell had Jin Hyuk gone through to end up like this? Her face hardened. Without wasting time, she demanded to know if he had really passed the trials. But one glance at his dead serious expression told her everything. No words needed. Before she could think twice, she lunged at him with a knife. But Jin Hyuk, using just a fraction of his new power, easily stopped her. To Lucia, he had always been a reckless, idiotic, greedy fool who didn't know when to back down. But we know the truth. It was that same stubbornness that gave him power. Without it, he'd still be a weak C rank, getting tossed around by S rankers. Even Lucia had to admit, if only to herself, that she was taken aback. And yeah, the artist didn't forget to bless us with some curves while showing that. Anyway, back to the point, Lucia acknowledged that he had gotten stronger. But she warned him to be careful. If he ended up in heaven or hell, she wouldn't be able to travel dimensions to save him. With that, she turned and headed toward the dungeon. She wasn't about to be left behind. And honestly, for the chaos ahead, Jinhyuk alone was more than enough. Jinhyuk was genuinely thankful to Lucia for staying by his side. But she immediately shut that down, making it clear she only helped him because if he died, the dungeon would be totally screwed. And of course, her help wasn't free. She demanded a mountain of sweets delivered to the boss's magic room as payment. Lastly, she gave him a final warning. The perception magic she had cast would soon wear off after she left. He needed to be ready before the Titan Guild found them. Jinhyuk made his way to the hall, where Lee Junshul was already waiting, quietly watching him with a look that clearly said he was wondering where on earth our boy had popped up from this time. Meanwhile, Secretary Lee Hyena couldn't hide her happiness. The moment she saw Jinhyuk, her face lit up with pure relief and excitement. For Jinhyuk, the feeling was mutual, though he kept it low-key. He was just glad that nothing major had happened while he was away. Hyena, overjoyed, showed her gratitude openly, but Jinhyuk simply brushed it off, treating it like it was nothing more than an ordinary friendship gesture. No big deal in his mind. After sharing a few casual words, Jinhyuk shifted his attention to Lee Junshul. Apparently, Junshul had been trying to get in touch with him, but when he couldn't, he decided to show up in person. That alone made Jinhyuk suspicious. After all, people like Junshul, rich, powerful types, didn't usually go out of their way unless there was something important brewing. Without wasting much time, Jinhyuk decided to cut straight to the point. He asked what was really going on in Junshul's mind. Junshul, catching the hint, didn't bother beating around the bush. Keeping a straight face, he asked Jinhyuk if he would be interested in creating a guild together. It was a bold move, but then again, it was classic Junshul, the dealer who always had a plan hidden up his sleeve. Jinhyuk was honestly taken aback by the sudden proposal. Hyena, who had half expected Junshul to suggest some clever escape route, seemed to pause for a moment, her mind already racing ahead. But it was time to get a little more realistic. Even if Guild Master Sango miraculously recovered, there was no going back to the Titan Guild anymore. The harsh truth was staring everyone in the face. The fact that no one from Titan had come to rescue Sango said it all. It was clear to Junshul, to Hyena, that the guild had completely rotted from the inside out. Junshul didn't believe for a second that anything could fix what had already decayed. In his eyes, the only solution was to build something entirely new from scratch. And at the very core of this new foundation, the person he wanted leading the charge was none other than Jinhyuk himself. Meanwhile, Jinhyuk just sat there, listening calmly as Junshul continued to lay out his plans in full detail. At one point, Junshul even flashed his iPhone, showing that he wasn't just all talk. He had already prepared a lot behind scenes. He confidently explained that he could personally handle all the resources they would need, from funding to materials. He had even arranged for a building that could serve as the headquarters for their new guild and had scouted several talented individuals who could potentially join them. He told Jinhyuk that he would send over all the details so he could take a closer look and evaluate everything himself. Lee Hyena, sitting nearby, was honestly impressed by how thorough and serious Junshul's preparations were. But being the sharp, realistic person she was, she didn't let that admiration cloud her judgment. She immediately pointed out the hard truth. No matter how much preparation Junshul had done, it still wasn't enough to take on the Titan Guild head-on. Even if they somehow managed to start confrontation, there was no way they could deal with an S-rank hunter like Kong Juntae, who was one of Titan's strongest assets. Of course, Junshul wasn't caught off guard by her concerns. He had already thought about it. Casually, he turned toward Jinhyuk and, without any hesitation, asked him if he could defeat Kong Juntae. Hearing that, Jinhyuk couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Part of him wondered why Junshul wasn't directing that question towards Sango instead. But thinking about it for a moment, it made sense. Sango was still in a critical condition after everything that had happened. Even if he recovered, it would take time, and by then, the opportunity they had now would be long gone. Junshul then explained that he had heard a rumor circulating among certain circles. According to the rumor, Jin Hyuk had already fought Kong Juntae once and survived. If that rumor was true, then there was a real chance that their plan could succeed. But if it was false, Junchul was ready to scrap the entire operation without a second thought. Simply put, the entire plan hinged on one thing: whether Jin Hyuk could actually take down Kong Juntae. And this rich blonde dealer was prepared to stake everything he had on that possibility. So he needed a clear answer. Could Jin Hyuk defeat Kong Juntae or not? But instead of answering immediately, Jin Hyuk felt excitement bubbling inside him. He didn't just blurt out a response. Instead, he leaned back, smiled, and said he wanted to hear the full plan first. Only after hearing everything would he give his answer. The scene shifted to a building where chaos had already broken out. A man came flying through the air, his face completely smashed in by a brutal punch, before crashing hard onto the floor and sliding across it like a rag doll. And the one responsible for that devastating blow? None other than Joe Wunschel, the leader of the Tyrant Guild. Joe Wunschel was absolutely furious. His anger had been simmering for a while now, thanks to the Titan Guild's thugs, who had started barging into his territory as if they owned the place. They didn't even bother to hide their arrogance, acting without a shred of fear or hesitation. Adding fuel to the fire was the recent news explosion about the Allron incident. Public opinion had turned sharply against the Tyrant Guild. Their reputation, already shaky, took a massive hit. Joe Wunschel had thought it would be smarter to lay low for a while, let things cool off, and avoid drawing more attention to themselves. But while they were busy keeping their heads down, the Titan Guild had seen an opportunity and moved in on their territory without mercy. Now, this gorilla was beyond pissed. If the Titan Guild won a fight, then fine. He wasn't going to hold back anymore. He was more than ready to meet them head-on and crush them. Back at Jin Hyuk's house, Junchul finally started explaining his plan in detail. His idea was simple but bold. He wanted to drag the Tyrant Guild into this whole mess. According to him, the Tyrant Guild had a massive force, almost comparable to the Titans, and their leader, who was the same gorilla-looking guy we had seen in earlier incidents, could definitely go head-to-head against the Titans if it came to that. However, Miss Hyena was skeptical. She pointed out that the Tyrant Guild was already in chaos because of the Allron incident. After suffering such a major loss, it was unlikely they would be thinking about going to war anytime soon. But from Junchul's perspective, it was actually easier now to make both of these rotten guilds clash. Recently, the Titans had been expanding their territory aggressively, and most of the land they were taking originally belonged to the Tyrant Guild. While other guilds had also been targeted, the Titans had clearly crossed the line with the Tyrants, and there's already a lot of bitterness building up because of that. Now, all they needed was a way to push the Tyrant Guild over the edge and make them take the first step against the Titans. Miss Hyena, with her sharp mind, already knew exactly how to ignite that spark. Junchul didn't immediately understand what she meant. That's when Jin Hyuk, speaking casually as if it wasn't a big deal, revealed the truth. They were the ones who had leaked the information related to the Allron incident in the first place. This revelation completely shocked Junchul, but he was smart enough to connect the dots quickly. If Jin Hyuk had leaked the information, it meant he had something to do with Allron's death. And since Jin Hyuk had been working with the Titan Guild at that time, this piece of information alone would be more than enough for the Tyrant Guild to justify attacking the Titans. Junchul realized that they could use this situation to their advantage by taking control of the chaos that would follow once the two guilds clashed. After the entire plan was laid out, Junchul turned to Jin Hyuk and asked for his opinion, and whether he was ready to join forces with him to make this plan a reality. Jin Hyuk, wearing a small smirk on his face, agreed without much hesitation. Miss Hyena, excited by how things were shaping up, started throwing out ideas for their new guild's name. But Jin Hyuk already had a name prepared in his mind. He chose a name drawn from mythology, a name that represented gods who once overthrew the Titans themselves. That name was Pantheon. Everyone liked the sound of it immediately. It fit perfectly with what they were trying to do. Junchul, never the type to waste time, decided they would begin working on the plan right away. According to the division of roles, Miss Hyena's job would be to leak the information to the Tyrant Guild. Junchul would focus on preparing supplies and resources for the coming conflict. And as for Jin Hyuk, his role for now was to divert the attention of any pursuers and buy them time. With everything decided and roles assigned, the plan officially set into motion. Meanwhile, the Titan Guild members were desperately searching for Sango, acting like a pack of crazed dogs. They were running around frantically, checking every possible hiding spot. Suddenly, one of them spotted two shadowy figures moving in the distance. His eyes widened in recognition. He realized it was Jin Hyuk and Lee Hyena. Without wasting a second, he quickly informed his team through the communicator that the targets were moving towards Sector D. And just like that, the entire group of Titan bastards immediately started chasing after them, closing in like bloodthirsty hounds. Up on the rooftop of a nearby building, Dae-yoon quietly observed the chaos below. Dae-yoon was a skilled illusionist, and thanks to his incredible ability to manipulate perception, Jin Hyuk managed to buy some precious time to make his move. While they waited, Dae-yoon couldn't help but bring up the rebellion happening inside the Titan Guild. He had heard bits and pieces earlier, but now he wanted the full story. Jin Hyuk had already explained the situation to him. The truth about how things had spiraled completely out of control within Titan Guild, about Guildmaster Sango's downfall, and most shocking of all, about Jin Hyuk's confrontation with Kang Juntae. Even Dae-yoon, who had seen his fair share of crazy things, was left stunned by that revelation. Still, as powerful as Kang Juntae was, Jin Hyuk was even stronger now. The real reason Jin Hyuk had set up this secret meeting, though, wasn't just to share information. He had a much bigger goal in mind. He wanted Dae-yoon to join the new guild he was forming, the guild that would stand apart from all the rotten ones currently out there. And hey, if you're enjoying the story so far, make sure to hit that like button. I seriously appreciate your support, and I really need it now more than ever. Thanks for sticking with me. Alright, now, let's get back to the story. The scene shifted to the Tyrant Guild's third branch, where, following Jin Hyuk's plan, Lee Hyena had already leaked the crucial information about the Alron incident. As expected, she didn't have any particular loyalty to any guild. For her, it was just a simple transaction. She sold the information for money and didn't look back. The leak report laid out everything in detail. It claimed that on the day of the Alron incident, members of the Titan Guild had infiltrated the area, intending to steal precious artifacts. During the operation, they ended up clashing with Alron. To cover up the mess they had created, the Titans allegedly leaked a false version of the story to the media, shifting the blame away from themselves. Unsurprisingly, the leader of the Tyrant Guild's third branch, the same gorilla-looking guy from before, did not take the report lightly. Reading through the details, his anger flared up immediately. He was furious that his guild's name had been dragged through the mud because of the Titan Guild's actions. Without wasting any time, he called one of his executives and ordered them to gather all the available members. As he slid on his heavy knuckle dusters, a sign that he was personally ready for a fight, he laid out his decision clearly and without hesitation. They would not sit quietly anymore. They would strike first. From that moment on, he declared that the Tyrant Guild was officially at war with the Titan Guild. Back at the Titan Guild headquarters, chaos had already begun to unfold. A guild member rushed in, urgently reporting that the Tyrant Guild had officially declared war on them. At first, the four-eyed bastard, Young-suk, thought it was nothing serious. In his mind, it was probably just another typical fight over territorial disputes, something they could easily handle like before. However, that casual attitude quickly shattered the moment he heard the real piece of news. Guildmaster Jo Woncheol himself, the leader of the Tyrant Guild, had personally declared war against them. Hearing that, the pale-faced executive completely lost his composure. Panic set in immediately because this wasn't some minor squabble anymore. If Jo Woncheol had stepped in personally, it meant things were about to get really ugly and really fast. Meanwhile, outside the guild building, the situation was already spiraling out of control. The leader of the Tyrant Guild, the gorilla guy, had already started his rampage. Without wasting any time, he threw a devastating punch at a bus parked nearby. The force behind the blow was so monstrous that the entire bus was sent flying straight toward a group of Titan Guild members. By some miracle, they managed to dodge it just in time, but they didn't even get a chance to breathe. In the very next moment, they found themselves just a few steps closer to the rampaging monster. That's when it finally hit them. They were well and truly screwed. Inside the building, Juntae suddenly burst out laughing loudly, so much so that both of the other guys stopped and stared at him, wondering if he had finally gone mad. But Juntae wasn't laughing because he had lost his mind. He was laughing because he understood something that the others hadn't realized yet. Juntae had sensed it earlier, the unsettling quietness. It had been too calm until now, like the eerie silence that comes just before a storm. He had already smelled trouble coming. But Young-sik, still stuck in panic mode, hadn't thought that far ahead yet. In his frantic state, Yang Sik immediately ordered someone to contact the association and report the situation. But that was pointless. They couldn't rely on the association, not this time. The reason was simple. The association already knew everything. They had already broadcast the warning publicly, and that was all they were willing to do. They had no intention whatsoever of stepping into the middle of a fight between guilds. This wasn't their problem, and they weren't about to get involved. Juntae quickly caught on to the real picture. He realized that for the association, this situation was actually perfect. It was a rare opportunity to let two of the biggest guilds tear each other apart without lifting a finger themselves. Meanwhile, Yang Sik, still desperate, tried to come up with a new approach. He thought maybe he could convince the association by bringing up concerns about civilian safety. Maybe if they made it about protecting innocent people, the association would be forced to act. But the man shot down that idea immediately. He told Yang Sik flat out, it wasn't going to happen. Meanwhile, back in the city, the situation was already spiraling out of control. News had broken out about the conflict, and authorities were urgently advising all citizens to evacuate to safe locations. In the middle of all this chaos, a heartbreaking scene unfolded. A little girl was crying beside her unconscious mother. Unfortunately, the two of them had gotten caught right in the middle of the battle between the Tyrant Guild and the Titan Guild. During the fight, one of the Tyrant Guild members launched a massive fire attack towards his Titan opponent. However, the Titan fighter managed to sidestep the attack at the last second, and the blast went flying in a completely different direction, straight toward the helpless little girl. Just before the attack could hit, someone stepped in and stopped it. It was our boy, Jinhyuk. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. These lunatics were fighting with such reckless abandon, not even caring about the civilians around them. He knelt down in front of the crying child, gently comforting her and checking if she was all right. Turning serious, he told Miss Lee that from now on, their top priority was to rescue civilians and protect them from getting caught in the crossfire. Without wasting any more time, they immediately started the evacuation operation. It became even clearer to Jinhyuk just how serious the situation was. The dealer, Junchul, was no ordinary figure. Only someone with real influence and power could have orchestrated a mess of this scale. Hyena quickly issued an order to everyone on their side. Begin the evacuation immediately and save as many civilians as possible. Over at the Titan Guild, things were already tense when someone reported the latest move Pantheon had made, rescuing civilians. It might have sounded like a simple act, but it was enough to make Yong Suk pause. He started to piece things together, realizing that Juntae had probably already figured out that Pantheon was using this whole situation as an opportunity to build their name. And with the way things were unfolding, it wouldn't be long before smaller guilds began flocking to their side. At first, Yong Suk decided it wasn't worth paying much attention to. Let them make their moves. Titan Guild was still far too powerful for a new guild to cause any real trouble. But then something clicked in his mind. He brought up the possibility that Pantheon might be connected to either Sango or Jinhyuk. Juntae dismissed the idea at first, thinking it sounded ridiculous. But Yong Suk didn't stop there. He pointed out that the name Pantheon wasn't just some random choice. It referred to the temple of gods who once defeated the Titans. To Yong Suk, it was starting to look like Pantheon had intentionally chosen that name as a direct challenge toward the Titan Guild. That small detail finally made things click for Juntae. Now it all made sense. Their sudden appearance, the perfectly timed declaration of war, and the way everything seemed to fall into place too smoothly. The more they thought about it, the clearer it became. It was almost too perfect to be a coincidence, and Yong Suk was convinced that Pantheon was the one pulling the strings behind everything that was happening. His train of thought was interrupted by the sudden buzz of his phone. He answered, only to receive an urgent update on Zhou Wenchul's movements. The gorilla himself was heading straight toward headquarters, right where Yong Suk currently was. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Yong Suk knew there was no time to waste. Things had escalated far beyond what they expected, and if it had come to this, then there was only one solution left. They had to settle things once and for all. With that in mind, he began formulating a plan. No more waiting around, no more playing defense. If Zhou Wenchul was coming to them, they would be ready. And Juntae, confident in his abilities, was already prepared to take Zhou Wenchul down. Meanwhile, the battlefield had turned into complete carnage. Hunters were slashing at each other without holding back, and it was turning into an all-out massacre, no different from a real war. Mages were busy preparing their spells, and when they launched their fire attacks, it didn't just target the enemy. It ended up destroying nearby buildings too. The chaos put the lives of countless civilians at risk. Amidst the destruction, Jun Chul appeared on the scene. Without wasting any time, he immediately started organizing an evacuation to get civilians out of danger. Once the evacuation was complete and the people were safe, Jun Chul took a moment to comfort the shaken citizens. He reassured them that their guild would always be there to protect and help them whenever needed. Of course, this guy didn't miss a chance to flash his iPhone during the whole process, practically marketing his guild right there on the spot. He made sure everyone saw it, taking pictures, making a scene, and it was obvious he was trying to promote the guild's image as heroes who cared about the people. Naturally, his subordinates couldn't help but feel secondhand embarrassment from his behavior. Even some of the civilians thought his actions were a bit strange. While they were grateful, it was clear they found his over-the-top performance a little awkward. At that moment, an officer from the Hunter Association arrived at the scene. He respectfully greeted Jun Chul and thanked him for saving the civilians. From that point on, the association would officially take control of the situation. The officer admitted he hadn't expected any guild to actually care so much about protecting civilians. When he asked which guild they belonged to, he found out that it was a newly formed one, a guild called Pantheon. After some time, Jun Chul left the scene. He couldn't help but wonder how those association members always managed to show up late, acting like they were there to take control, smoothing things over with empty words. Their main concern was never the actual situation. It was always about protecting the public image of the guilds they supported. Anyway, they had already done their part, put on a decent enough show, and now even the association was starting to take them into consideration. That alone was enough for them. They didn't need anything else. Later, the three members of Pantheon gathered for a meeting. Ever since the war between the Titans and Tyrants had escalated into a full-scale conflict, the situation had become critical. Civilians were getting caught in the crossfire, and their safety had become Pantheon's top priority. At the same time, protecting innocent people would naturally help Pantheon build a positive image for themselves, which wasn't a bad thing either. But while Hyena focused on the logistics of protecting civilians, the dealer, Jun Chul, was clearly worried about something else. The destruction caused by the ongoing war was on a whole different scale. If this kept going, it would spiral out of control, and they wouldn't be able to handle it. They needed to find a way to end it, and fast. That's when Jin Hyuk brought up a plan. Apparently, he had received a call from someone who had been tracking Joe Wonchul, the gorilla-like guy known for his intense hatred toward the Titan Guild. Unsurprisingly, it turned out to be Dae Yoon, who had been assigned the task of keeping an eye on that dangerous beast. Miss Lee Hyena immediately grew concerned the moment Jin Hyuk began to explain. His plans were always reckless, and this one didn't sound any different. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the reality in front of them. If two S-rankers actually clashed head-on, the level of destruction would be unimaginable. She did some quick mental calculations, and the numbers didn't look good. In her opinion, there was still a chance that Joe Wonchul wouldn't go that far. Maybe he wouldn't engage in a direct fight. But that's when Jin Hyuk dropped the real bomb. Joe Wonchul was already on his way to the Titan Guild's main headquarters. That piece of news instantly pushed Hyena into a state of panic. But before she could fully process it, Jin Hyuk calmly laid out his plan. Now that both of those monsters, the Tyrant Guild's gorilla and the Titan's core power, were going to be in the same place, he was going to take them both down at once. That was enough to throw Hyena into full-blown panic mode. Stage 100. She tried to stay calm. Somehow, she managed to pull herself together and take in what Jin Hyuk was saying. She knew he had become much stronger than before. She had seen herself. But taking on two S-rankers alone? That was another level entirely. She had her doubts. Still, Jin Hyuk didn't hesitate. He turned, took a steady stance, and leapt in the direction of the battlefield, his decision already made. And even though part of her was still worried sick, Miss Lee knew one thing for sure. She could trust Jin Hyuk, especially when she looked into those confident, unwavering black eyes. The scene shifts to another part of the city, where the gorilla guy had finally arrived at his destination. His expression was cold and unreadable, his pace steady and confident. It didn't take long for trouble to start. Two members of the Titan Guild, who were stationed outside the building, noticed his approach. At first, they stepped forward to stop him, clearly unaware of who they were dealing with. But the moment they recognized his face, their expressions changed instantly. Panic set in, and one of them quickly tried to contact the control room for urgent backup. Unfortunately for them, it was already too late. Before the call even went through, One of the guards was sent flying across the pavement with a single blow, completely taken out. The second guard didn't last much longer. Joe Wonchil, the man known as the Gorilla, wasn't in the mood for small talk. He moved without hesitation and finished off the second guy, just without warning. Meanwhile, inside the Titan Guild headquarters, things were starting to stir. Yangsik received the emergency report about Joe Wonchil's arrival and immediately passed the information to Juntae. Juntae, however, didn't seem the least bit worried. On the contrary, he looked completely confident, almost smug. He didn't even flinch at the news. With overwhelming confidence, he stated that he would personally bring back the head of the Tyrant Guild's master and present it as a gift.